different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. There's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are. Thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Marek Health for all your hormone optimization and performance needs. All right, guys, we've got a new limited edition drop, the original Mountain Dog tee that John Meadows had us design from the very beginning. So it's the first tee that he had made. Once again, this is a limited edition item. So when they're gone, they're gone. While I have your attention, you've seen me wear this one in a few podcasts to date. We've been holding back on it. This here, the 4-star tee, I think that's what we call it. It's on the website, new items, also under limited edition. Check out our shoulder saver pads. It's an easy way to do limited restricted range of motion exercises like board press that basically you just pop the pad on the bar, reduces the range of motion, pop it back off when you're done. Thank you guys for the support. Head over to elitefts.com. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. What's up, guys? We're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Dr. Todd Lee. He is a real doctor, a real MD, right? That specializes in the treatment and education of bodybuilders, athletes, strength athletes, bodybuilders expanded, which would be physique, classic, bikini, the whole 9 yards, IFBB pro, and a podcaster, and he runs the YouTube channel Anabolic University. And we got a lot of topics we're going to discuss, but I'm going to jump off with some of the things that you touched on the podcast, on your podcast, right, where we talked about some stupid shit. So we're definitely going to talk about a lot of stupid shit. That's my favorite moving forward, because that's the funnest stuff to talk about. But I want to, we had a conversation about being all in, and I want to kind of go into that. But before we get there, when did you first get into bodybuilding?
That's an interesting question. So when I was 8 years old, I saw my friend's uncle, and his name was Uncle Kenny, and he looked like He-Man with a mullet. So imagine He-Man with a mullet.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that guy's amazing. And he's like, that's my Uncle Kenny. And I was like, what the is that? Are we allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, good, because you're getting it either way. So I was like, what is that? He's like, he's Mr. Michigan. And I was like, I want to be Mr. Michigan. Because instantaneously, I think He-Man's the master of the universe. So Mr. Michigan must be master of Michigan.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like I don't know what a governor is. So I think that the leader of the state of Michigan is Mr. Michigan. So being a boy, I automatically assume that being jacked is where your source of authority comes from, not who can lie the most, or who can embezzle the most funds, or who can lock people in their homes and take away their gym access. That's not what makes a leader, but just being jacked would make a leader, like Conan. So I was just like, oh. So I stopped playing with kids on the playground and started doing push-ups and sit-ups and pull-ups and things like that. And I switched from whole milk to skim milk. And that was, my mom wouldn't let me lift weights yet. And so I was just dedicating myself to that going forward. And let's see, then when I was 12, I got a personal trainer. And I started being allowed to lift weights because it was supervised. My mom didn't want me lifting weights unless I was supervised. So and my friends would make fun of me. And they're like, you're not going to gain any muscle lifting 1 day a week. And I was like, I'm going to gain more muscle lifting 1 day a week than you do lifting never. It's like 1 day is better than 0 days. And just pretty much focused on bodybuilding. I didn't know it was called bodybuilding at the time, but that's basically what I was doing. And it started that by the time I was 12, I was reading labels. I wouldn't eat anything that had more than 5 grams of fat per serving. And I focused on having as much protein and carbs as I could eat in a day. And every single meal had to have protein. And I tried to eat about 4 times a day.
So at that age, where are you getting information from at that age? Magazines?
No. I think school. Like I had male teachers,
health class.
No, we didn't have. I was like 4th grade. So I had a 4th grade teacher, was Mr. McKee, and he was also the basketball coach. And so I would ask my martial arts sensei, I would ask my basketball coach, I'd ask my wrestling coach. And then once we got into middle school, we had a weightlifting class. So we had the gym teacher was basically the weightlifting coach. And then my mom had been lifting since the 70s. She actually opened a salad bar in Los Angeles with Richard Simmons before Richard Simmons did aerobic instruction. So my dad also lifted.
Okay.
So I had my mom and my dad as resources. Then I had books, because I'm the type of kid, because by the time I was 12, I'd be running a Dungeons and Dragons group with up to like 6 kids. So we didn't have the internet. So aside from my encyclopedias, I could get on my bike and ride to the library and then use my library card and read books at the library. That was the internet before the internet. There's this thing called a library. And there's this, you don't just burn them. You actually can use them and read books out of them. And that's where I would learn stuff.
Was there training at the time for the sports you were playing in, or were the sports just a distraction from the training?
My mom said when I was like 5, she's like, you're a little asshole. We got to teach you how to fight. Otherwise you can get your ass beat. So I got enrolled in judo at 5. And then my grandfather taught me how to box at like 7. And then I did like Shotokan karate after that. And it just snowballed from there. And so as far as the other sports go, I felt pressured to be involved in sports because it's the Midwest in the 80s. So like where I grew up, if you don't play football, you're gay, basically. So I wanted to do sports because I wanted to be a boy. And that's what boys did. Even though I liked anime before it was called anime, like Voltron and Transformers. And I liked, I read, like I was reading Alfred Hitchcock when I was 8. There was actually, in the 3rd grade class, there was a Alfred Hitchcock book, but it was spine in, not spine out, in the library. So I was like in the classroom. So I was like, I was of course told to sit in the corner because I'm bad. So I'm in the corner, I'm near the book. So I pulled it. I'm like, what is this? Like, oh, it's Alfred Hitchcock. My mom watches these shows. So I started reading the book. I'm like, this is so much scarier than the actual movies. And I was watching Nightmares on Elm Street and Friday the 13th when I was 6. So I was really into horror, really into comics. They didn't have horror comics that I knew of at the time, but I was into Batman because it was the darkest comic. Punisher. I would use book reports on Punisher Warzone. Like I was just so into Punisher growing up. It's like I even got a tattoo about it. X-Men. And I was just a nerdy kid. But it's like I could break someone's nose if they called me a nerd. Like, and that, so it basically was there to cancel it out a little bit. Balance
it out.
Yeah.
Did you compete while you were in high school?
No, I was never a competitive person really until I got to like later in school. Once I got to med school, I started becoming competitive, and I was competitive about grades. Like, how can because it's kind of like in undergrad, you have to score really good to get into med school. And then you're taking standardized tests where you're going to be basically being compared to everyone and only the best get in. And so it's one of those things where it's like a funnel where the best of the best gets to the next level. Then of that level, the best of the best gets to the next level. And of that level, the best of the best gets to the next level. And then by the time you're in med school, you're so competitive about grades it's like, that's when I got the competitive spirit. So when I graduated and I'm now a doctor, I'm like, what do I do? So I started powerlifting, because when I was in med school, I picked up Arnold's encyclopedia, the one from 98. And I was like, why didn't I buy this in 98 when I almost bought it?
So you talking the big one?
Yeah, the big one.
Okay.
98, it came out in 98. I grabbed it. I was scanning through it at a Borders, and I was like, I don't want to read this much about how to lift weights, how to lift weights. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah.
And then I got it again in 2000. I went and bought it in 2008, and that changed everything. I started focusing a lot on bodybuilding, realized I was unsuccessful at bench squat and deadlift. I couldn't do bench squat and deadlift correctly. And that's the hallmark stuff. It's like the bread and butter exercises. Turns out I wasn't good at anything, but I was really not good at those compound lifts. And so when I got a job in the country, it's a place called Howell, Michigan. And when I got a job there was a powerlifting team. And I was like, okay, you guys know how to do bench squat and deadlift. Will you teach me? And you probably know all these guys too. It was Chip Tallman, Jamie Caparosa, Jeff Johnson, eventually Daryl and Dottie, Joe Smolinski, Bob Birkenbach, I think is how you say his last name, and Bill Strong. And I'm sure you recognize at least some of those names in there. Yeah. Especially Jeff, because Jeff stuck with it as world champion his several times at this point. I think he still holds the state the record for when he was 19 and 98 in the bench at 198 class. So raw. So Jeff literally took his wrist straps off his wrist and handed them to me. And like, you know, that expression, someone's so nice they give you the shirt off their back. Yeah. He literally gave me the wrist straps off his wrist.
Well, he's trying to suck you in.
Well, I think he's just nice. Jeff's just one of the nicest people I've ever met. So Chip Tallman said to me, he goes, I'll teach you, but you have to commit to a meet. We'll only teach you if you're willing to compete. And I was like, okay. And he's like, well, I'm going to give you to Kathy to teach you how to bench. Don't be offended because she's a girl. I'm not saying that you deserve a girl coach. She's just a really good bencher. I was like, okay. Didn't even occur to me that it was a slight in any way because it was his wife, you know? And so between Kathy and Chip and Jeff Johnson, that's where I learned powerlifting from. And I eventually competed. And so in Howell, you weren't allowed to wear the Punisher skull unless you were on the team and you won a meet.
Okay.
So I kept competing until I eventually earned my skull. And now I have it tattooed on my arm. Yeah. But that's why people think it's because I'm a Punisher fan. I am a Punisher fan, but that's not why I have that skull there.
How long did you compete in powerlifting then?
Only like 2 years, because I was doing so good at bodybuilding. I had to pick one. Yeah. And I was pretty good, as we talked about before. I can do good with the math because I was so light at 143 pounds. Yeah. But no one respects someone who wins best lifter because they're light. In powerlifting, it really is about who can push the biggest numbers. You know, and so in bodybuilding, not that it's any different, is people don't give a fuck if you're the world's best bantamweight. They only care, like the worst heavyweight still more impressive than the best bantamweight in most situations. Yeah. But I won my first bodybuilding show by, like, I was a bantam, but I beat the lightweights because I was that shredded. And, you know, today, by my standards today, that's not even that shredded. But for then, in that environment, I was pretty shredded at a state level show in 2009. And it's like, I was doing so good at bodybuilding and my joints hurt so bad powerlifting. And they didn't hurt that bad bodybuilding, that I was just pretty much transitioned over to mostly bodybuilding. I basically straddled the two up until 2012. But when I won North American, I was like, okay, so I won a pro qualifier. If I was heavier, I would be an IFBB pro right now. Like, this is silly for me to keep messing with powerlifting. I broke my goals because Chip wanted me to set goals. So he said, so I said 405 in a shirt, double my body weight without a shirt. And I did that in that year, 2012. And so I was like, okay, I achieved my powerlifting goals. Because as we talked about, does it matter if you win the meet if you didn't break a PR? You know, like, and you don't need to do meets to do PRs. Yeah. So what's the point? Like your Sunday morning bench with the guys is what matters because you have it on camera and it goes on Instagram. So it's like you have physical evidence that millions of people or thousands of people are going to see. Who shows up at a powerlifting meet in 2012? 7 people?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bigger sport now, but there's no one there back then. So it's like, I mean, I don't need the validation of being there. It's kind of like if you wanted to be a fitness coach, just having bathroom video shoots like Alex Eubank, you're going to look a million times better than on stage under bright LED lights. So it's almost like your stage shots invalidate your bullshit marketing.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, what's the meet do? The meet's like, well, you don't get to control when you're ready to lift. You go up there when your flight is supposed to be. You're rushing sometimes. You've either had the knee wraps on for 2 minutes or they're not even completely on. You know, like they fuck up your fight music. So you're not even in the mood that... like so much can go wrong on meet day.
It can't in a show.
Huh?
It can't go wrong in a show.
Fuck yeah, it can. Fuck yeah, it can go wrong in a show. But nothing goes wrong in your bathroom, hopefully, unless you frequent Taco Bell.
Yeah.
But like usually the bathroom's a safe place to take pictures in. You can take the same picture 1,000 times, filter the fuck out of it. You're gonna look better than you ever do on stage. Likewise, at the gym, when you're with your spotter and you've got your music playing and you've got your team there and you're completely safe and there's no pressure, you're going to bench better at home in your home gym on your Forza bench than some strangers loading the bar. You don't even know if you're going to get fucking killed. Just like, this guy's 13. Why is he loading my plates?
Yeah.
How can he count? Like there's a screen telling them what to put on the bar. The fact that they need that is terrifying. They're color coded not to fuck this up. We've got rainbows on either side of me.
Yeah.
It's like, whereas like Jeff will make no mistakes. Bob will make no mistakes. You are safe.
Yeah.
If your head's about to come off, Bob will catch it and save you.
It changed just a little bit. The better the meat. And you can peak for meat. You know, there's those things. I'm not going to try to talk you into be a power lifter. You're a pro already. So just stay on that road.
Well, technically, I'm an APF pro because you check that box. It's like everybody who's like, well, I'm not amateur by these definitions. That means I'm a pro.
When did you know you wanted to be a doctor?
Fuck. When my dad told me, if you're a veterinarian, you have to kill dogs.
So you wanted to be a vet?
I wanted to be a vet because I love animals.
Yeah.
I'm like, about people.
Yeah.
It's like, I like science and I like animals. So a vet made sense. He's like, yeah, but you're going to have to just kill tons of animals because people aren't going to want to pay for them to get better. And I was like, oh.
Yeah,
like, I would be crying all day at work, not just because I'm allergic to cats. That's the other thing is I'm extremely allergic to cats. I'd be the worst vet.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, I won't put their animals to sleep. Like, I'm actually going to try to save them.
So was this in undergrad or was it in high school?
No,
when was
like
this?
Middle school.
Middle school.
Yeah. Because he said, like, your handwriting's so shit, you have to be a doctor. It's like, you don't write in English, you write in hieroglyphics.
So that was the default?
Yeah.
Like nothing else?
I'm too blind to be a fighter pilot. My handwriting is too shitty to be. You'd think I got Parkinson's. I can't even write my own fucking writing.
Yeah. Well, that's what the scripts look like, right?
We got electronic stuff for that now. We got around that.
Yeah, I always would wonder when I get a prescription, like, what the fuck does this say?
I tried to read. I couldn't even sign my name on your physical. It's like, I fucked that up. I was like, they're not even going to believe this.
Yeah,
they're going to think we forged this.
Doesn't matter anyhow.
Like, I put MB. I was like, what? It's a D. Let's scratch that in there.
So like, with the bodybuilding, was that in med school or was that in undergrad?
So I didn't start competing in bodybuilding until I was already a doctor.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't do shit in med school. Med school required a lot of attention. Yeah. I didn't feel the need to compete until I got out of.
What about training?
I didn't really train through med school much until I realized how fat I was. So the first year of med school, I got fat. And then I was like, this is the fattest I've ever been. I look horrible. It was disgusting. So I started, it's so funny because I hadn't read Arnold's book yet. And I was using the same type of science knowledge I had my whole life, which is I'm going to eat chicken breasts and I'm going to eat oranges and beans. I was like, that covers my protein, covers my carbs, the fat's in the chicken. I don't really need fat. And I'll get some vitamin C from oranges. And that's all I ate. And I lost like 30 pounds in one semester.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was just skin and bones.
Mm-hmm.
And then my buddy was like, you got to start using gear. And I was like, I'll take some time and research it. I was like, I'm sure we can figure out how to do it right. Because he went to high school with me, we went to high school, college, and med school with me. And he's like, by my wedding, he was like huge. He was like 250 something. He was like using a ton of Tren and a bunch of other stuff to bulk. Turns out he had no idea what he was doing. And it was just the most dumbass cycles ever. Mm-hmm. But I was always way more conservative with everything. I was super conservative. But I wanted to do things as scientific as possible. I met with individuals who were former steroid users, current steroid users, listened to everything they said, would go back, research it, and read about the studies and understand exactly how this stuff works. What's funny is by the time I did my first bodybuilding show, the person who taught me posing wanted to control my diet too. And literally 100% of the information I was getting from that coach was wrong. But in order to get the posing coaching, I had to do the wrong diet. And it was like, whatever. I gave him my word. I'll do it. He's like, all that science stuff isn't real. Science is bullshit. We know what we're doing. And it's like, okay. And it's just like, no. None of the bro science that was around before Hani Rambod pretty much was real. Mm-hmm. It's just nonsense. Like, we're going to do a month of beef, then we're going to do a month of chicken, then we're going to do a month of fish. I was like, well, what beef? Is it like 73-27 beef or 96-4 beef? It's like, I don't do numbers. Just do 5 pounds of beef a day. 5 pounds of beef a day. Then we switch to 5 pounds of chicken a day. Then we switch to 5 pounds of fish a day. And I mean, would that work? I mean, yeah, if you're doing keto, you're decreasing the amount of fat. Mm-hmm. So you're decreasing
calories,
the calories
as well. Yeah.
So you're at the end, 5 pounds of tilapia is going to be about 500 grams of protein, which is 2,000 calories. So like, yeah, I mean, this is like, you don't eat vegetables, like stuff like that. So it worked. And then it was, like after I gained 20 pounds of blubber in like 4 weeks on that diet. And I was like, this is bullshit. So Joe Leahy, I don't know if you know who that is, but he's no longer with us, but he was really my first real coach. And he taught me most of what I knew about bodybuilding. And he just put me on, it was 10 chicken breasts, a third of a cup of oatmeal, and 2 Splenda packets. That's your diet. And
for the day.
A day.
Yeah.
And so I was doing labor and delivery on call for the whole month, 8 weeks out, basically. So I lived at the hospital. I slept there. I would take my pager with me in scrubs to the cemetery, and I do sprints up and down the hill for my cardio. Mm-hmm. Sprint up the hill, walk down the hill, sprint up the hill, walk down the hill. And then when I told the nurses to page me when the girls got to 3 centimeters, then I'd run back over the hospital, deliver the baby, wash all that off, go back out to the cemetery and do more sprints. And then like at my lunch break, I'd go to the gym and lift. And so that would be like what I would do for that month. And then the next month was ER. And that was during swine flu. So right before my first show, I got swine flu. So I have swine flu, and I'm, what do you call it?
Well, did it lean you out more?
Fuck if I know. It's like, I don't remember that much of details, but it was just like, I remember how tough I was when I was younger. And I feel like like now that I'm efficient and now that I'm structured, it's like I'm like a lazy bitch. Like I do 50 sets to failure for every body part. I train 12 times a week. I'd be doing 4 hours of weights a day, 3 hours of cardio a day, sleep 2 hours a day because the rest of the time was at the hospital working. And it was like on 18 carbs a day.
How'd the show go?
That was the first show I did. So yeah. I got first.
So it worked.
Yeah, it worked like a charm. Joe's like, don't take off your sweats until you weigh in. Whatever you do, don't take off your sweats till you weigh in. I was like, okay. And he's like, wait for it. And I was like, okay. And then like when they want me to get on the scale, I took off my sweats and everyone was talking and just got quiet. Nobody said shit. And then I put my clothes back off and walked off, and he stayed there to listen. And then he came up, he's like, dude, you were so fucking shredded. Everybody just was talking about how fucking shredded this new guy is. And I was like, good. And then he had me, there is my competition, the lightweights were in the posing room. And what's funny is Jay Cutler was there that year. He just won the Olympia back. And what's another weird thing is my wife's employee was doing his tan.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't know he did that. So they bumped into each other and like, what are you doing here? Like, what are you doing here? It's like, I'm painting Jay Cutler. It's like, how the fuck do you know Jay Cutler? He's like, oh, I'm a close friend of his. And she's like, what are you doing here? It's like, my husband's competing. It's like, I didn't know your husband competed. And I was like, what? Oh. And it's like, so Joe had me pose in the posing room in front of everybody. And my wife happened to be sitting next to the guy who I was competing against, who actually stood a chance. And he just said, I just lost. It's like, and she's like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, Todd's going to win for sure. I'm fucked. So that's where I learned the psychology of it too.
Yeah.
That like the backstage, you would get your first chance to win. Look, at powerlifting, I don't know if that works.
No.
But in bodybuilding, all you have to do is take your clothes off and start posing. And everybody who's not as lean as you is going to get softer.
Mm-hmm.
Their cortisol is going to go up. They're going to start looking worse. So you can start defeating them backstage before you ever make it to the stage.
What area of medicine were you planning on going into when you finished med school?
So this is kind of a sad story. So I had wanted to be a brain surgeon. And so I was doing brain surgery in med school. You're not supposed to, but it was like, I was so enthusiastic, and my USMLE scores were so high that I was pretty much going to get in the program. And this was at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit that I was doing this. And one thing people don't realize about surgery is that if you're at a teaching hospital, it's rarely the surgeon who's doing the surgery. Now, sometimes he is the primary surgeon, and then there's a secondary surgeon who's a resident or a medical student, or there's a tertiary student. But in this department, they had one brain surgeon, and then he'd be booked in 4 ORs at the same time, kind of. And then there'd be 8 residents doing the work. Now, they'll deny this, and maybe they'll sue me for it. I don't care. I'm not saying anyone's names. And this is not specific to that hospital. This is pretty normal for multiple hospitals, whether it was breast cancer removal, ovarian cancer removal. As a med student, I did a lot of stuff that normally med students wouldn't do because I was dead set on being a brain surgeon, and I'm a hyper competitive person. And so unlike using the match, I went outside the match so I could pick my hospital. Instead of waiting for the school to assign me where to go for my rotations, I would put a suit on, get some donuts, drive to the medical education department of the hospital I wanted to do my rotations at, give the women in human resources donuts, and flirt with them so that they would move my file to the top of the list so that I could get in at that hospital as a med student. And then I would find the surgeon, read up about him, talk to him about his cases, ask him if I could be in his cases and stuff like that, and actually get promoted up past other med students so that I could be in those competitive surgeries. So I was doing like open brain surgery by 27, not a primary surgeon, unless there was like one situation where it was me and the chief resident, and the chief resident panicked because the person started hemorrhaging really bad. And so I had to step in and try to stop the bleeding while he pulled it together. So it's like one of those things where I was secondary surgeon and open surgery on the brain. And most of neurosurgery is actually done on spines. People don't realize that. There's actually a turf war between orthopedic surgeons and neurosurgeons back then about spines, because spinal surgery is so much money because everyone's getting spinal surgery because they have back pain. Newsflash, spinal surgery doesn't make the back pain go away. It's like, this is not the best way to treat a disease. But you asked what I want to do. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. My wife was so pissed about the hours. She was so livid about the hours because she never got to see me, that I would wake up at 3:45. I'd have a protein shake. I'd be to the hospital by 5. I'd be seeing patients by 5:30 there. And then I'd be in surgery by 6. I'd be out of surgery by 6 p.m., drive home. I would have time for a meal, and I would do the bike for 30 minutes, and then I would do 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups. And then I would go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So there was zero relationship, not even like high and by practically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And she was like, this isn't going to work. And so to save my marriage, I switched from neurosurgery to primary care sports medicine, which I don't know if there's not a lot that I regret in life. That might have been one of the worst decisions I ever made.
Why so?
Because she's not still my wife, basically. That didn't really actually make a difference in the marriage. That once I had started bodybuilding and I got really, really lean, she started to be really mean. And she was very verbally abusive because she didn't like the physique. It made her feel uncomfortable about herself.
So where's your story go after that?
So I did the primary care sports medicine, and I was in practice in Howell, and I was doing the powerlifting and the bodybuilding thing. And they really didn't like me doing diets for people because I would think, they don't need
who's they?
The senior partners.
Okay.
So they didn't like it. So they wanted me to stop writing diets. And I was like, but it's getting them off their cholesterol meds. And this exercise is helping this person with their anxiety. And these 5 people didn't need orthopedic surgery because all they needed to do was do the exercises, and the pain went away. And so there was a revenue report where I was making 1/10 as much as the other people because I wasn't billing anything, because nobody needed to come back for prescription refills because I was getting all these patients off their medications.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, you're costing money. So they can't fire you for that. So they fire you for insubordination.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, fuck this, what asshole. So I started doing bikini contest prep because right then is when bikini was taking off. And I was making about as much doing bikini contest prep as I was doing medicine. So I was like, what the fuck am I?
Yeah.
Like my wife wanted me to go back. I didn't want to bother with it. I was happy with what I was doing. And I was like, we've got money. What difference does it make? And it's like that marriage fell apart. I mean, that could be a podcast in and of itself. And so I pretty much just did bikini contest prep and personal training, coaching, in-person coaching up until I started in the supplement industry. That because I had a biochemistry degree and I was already sponsored by LG Sciences, I ended up getting a job writing for and designing products for Mind and Muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the articles on Mind and Muscle, all the videos on Mind and Muscle, the Mind and Muscle product line, those were all mine. And then I started designing other products for other companies like Liquid Labs. There was a Death Star Labs for a while. And I did the supplement stuff for a while until I ended up leaving because of ethics. I didn't really agree with the ethics of somebody. And so I switched over and I started up my own online personal training and coaching. And I started my own supplement company called Valhalla Labs in 2015.
Okay. And so that's what you currently do now.
It was until COVID. Then COVID hit us hard because all the gyms were closed. So I have 3 different gym related businesses, but long and the short of it is it was really bad financially for a while. From 2015, about 2019, things started going pretty good. Business actually started picking up. And that's when I won the overall in the Michigan and bodybuilding. That's when I won Masters Nationals. And then the following year, 2020, COVID hit, pretty much wiping the businesses out all at once. I did win North American again. And this time I got a pro card, but 21 and 22 were really bad. And then 2023, I'm now restarting Valhalla Labs with new partner and a new production facility, which is very difficult to find good manufacturers to work with because that was a lot of the problem was with the other Valhalla Labs. The first one is that almost all the money was sank into one order. And then the guy just pocketed the money and then went out of business. So he just pocketed all our. So we spent money suing him, and then that didn't go anywhere because we won the lawsuit in multiple states, but they can't collect it from him because he had an LLC. We had to sue the LLC. So it pretty much murdered that business.
Yeah.
And it damaged the relationship I had with that business partner at the time. So now this is going to be probably Valhalla Labs will be producing products again by February of this year. So probably a couple weeks after this airs. And I also have a new coaching business with Dr. Credo Dodson that we started in end of 2022, but it really took off in 2023. Thanks to Paul Barnett encouraging me to restart my YouTube channel, which was banned in 2018. And that's Apex Coaching.
2018.
Yeah, I got banned from YouTube in 2018. Right when Tony Huge got banned the first time and Dylan Gemelli got banned, I got taken down with them because guilty by association.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even though I don't know them personally, it was a purge of like a million.
PED, yeah.
It was everything was being purged at that time. And so the coaching business is really cool because Dr. Dodson and I also started with Fusion Regenerative Therapies as a director of human performance. So I started practicing again through online telemedicine through Fusion, and I also have this coaching business with Karina. So we've integrated this so that basically the flow chart is the person gets a consult, then I order them blood work, then we review the blood work. The diet is based on the blood work. So is this a cholesterol? Is this a blood pressure diet? Is this a thyroid diet? Is it a combination of these things? The micronutrients, whether it's selenium, iodine, cabergoline, all that stuff is all integrated together to treat whatever blood work abnormalities there are, as well as achieve the goal of either fat loss or muscle building. And then if medication is necessary, whether it's TRT, whether it's thyroid medication, whether it's blood pressure medication, telmisartan, what do you call it, Synthroid, all that is taken care of and ordered for the patient and gets delivered to their door based on that. And soon, of course, once Valhalla Labs is up and running, then we've got their supplements and their medication will get mailed to them, as well as them I do their training programming similar to Mike Israel's Renaissance periodization. I use a very safer use model of PEDs when it comes to how I do the HRT and all that, similar to J3 University, which Victor Black claims is his brainchild. But I have to say his name, otherwise he's going to flip the shit. But the bottom line is I use the most modern approach towards PEDs and everything to make sure that they're as healthy as possible and achieving the goals of muscle building or fat loss. Mm-hmm. And it's really integrated system. And usually the way people find out about me is through podcasts. Appreciate the help, as well as my YouTube channel, Dr. Todd Lee's Anabolic University. Also, I'm on Anabolic Bodybuilding. It's live chats every Saturday on Paul Barnett's Anabolic Bodybuilding channel. And so through the YouTube and Instagram and other social media outlets, that's how people find me. And then they can get me to be their doctor and their coach.
Now, when we were on your podcast, we were talking about, being all in.
Right.
And then you were saying in your earlier time, so I'm assuming post med school.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
You thought you were all in, right? And we're living in your car doing stupid shit like that, and now being all in looks different.
Yeah.
Right. So when you were in that stage, because I don't want to say we all, but a lot of us have been there. Like, how did you justify that to yourself?
I didn't. I was totally self-aware. I was like, I literally gave up being a brain surgeon to teach girls how to pose in bikini for a bikini contest. Like, I am a fucking retard. Mm-hmm. What is wrong with me? I literally let my wife get in the way of my dream to be a brain surgeon. And then the marriage fell apart anyway. So now I'm the world's smallest bodybuilder. And somehow girls are driving 4 or 5 hours to pay me to take their clothes off for me and have me tell them what's wrong with them and to spin around a circle. How the fuck is this real life? Like, I'm the world's biggest loser. Why are women paying me to tell them what to do? This is so weird.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think it'd be the opposite, that if you're the brain surgeon, girls would be driving across the state or across multiple states to pay you to tell them something. But no, this is, you are literally in poverty wearing rags, and you have people driving all over hell and back to have you tell them when to wake up, what to eat, what to do. It's like, I understood in concept that 50 Shades of Grey was real, but I'm literally living it, and I'm not a billionaire. I'm broke as shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this makes no sense at all. How the fuck is this happening? This is the weirdest life. You could never, no one would ever believe this. If I wrote a book about what my fucking life is, no one would fucking believe this book.
Mm-hmm.
This is ridiculous. And, you know, people are telling me like, you're never going to turn pro. You're never going to be on the Olympia stage. You're never going to make money at bodybuilding. Why are you wasting your time? You know, all this stuff. And I was like, I'm not going to quit on myself. I don't care what you think.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to be a pro. I am going to be on the Olympic stage, or I'm going to die trying. That's that. One way or another. It will happen.
So the online training and all that was just to support the competing.
Right. That's all it was. It's just like, I'm an addict and I'll do anything to get my fix. And the fix is breaking PRs.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you turn 42 and you start tearing shit, you're like, I can't even do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I have to give up on being strong and just focus on being big. Because trying to get stronger to get bigger might work, sort of, but not after you're 40.
Mm-hmm.
It's like at that point, kind of have to hang up your belt and focus on a waist trainer or something. Like you have to focus on, I'm going to do the smartest, most technical, scientifically wise choices in exercise selection and execution to gain the most amount of muscle with the least amount of trauma to this form. Because it's not going to withstand, you know, I can't do 500 pounds for reps week in and week out and on my frame and last.
Well, that's what you realize now, but how would you explain that to yourself back then?
I wouldn't, because that back then would just tell me to go fuck myself.
Well, that's the issue when it comes to educating, right?
Yeah.
Is we're trying to get those messages out to those people that I would have said the same thing.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't give a shit what you say. It's like, but I'm you from the future. I'd say you're me from a possible future. I'm not good. You're not going to be my actual future, because I'm going to make better choices and not end up where you are.
Yeah.
It's like, I wouldn't even listen to me. I'd be like, I know what, I've watched enough Flash episodes to know about alternate realities.
So was it the injuries that made you relook at those things?
Yeah. As I didn't think I could get hurt. Because I lifted well. I lifted controlled with a slow eccentric. I was never bouncing out of the hole. I was never explosive. I was always super technical and shit. And it was just, I didn't do anything wrong. It was just like one hamstring tore in like 4 places when I was doing a warm-up set. And I was like, this is probably just my age. And a lot of people are like, no, it's because you're driving to New York every weekend to see your girlfriend and then driving back. And then you lift for 3 days and then you drive back to New York. Like your life is retarded. Like, you know, you're not drinking enough. You're not eating enough. You're not sleeping enough. You're in the car for 7 hours twice a week. Like, no, you had to tear, that it was inevitable. Mm-hmm. And I think I had COVID. I think I had COVID and I was lifting and I was deadlifting up to 500 that day. And and I just got a massage, which actually fixed permanent extroversion of my left hip, so that now my left foot is actually pointing forward for the first time ever. And so now the hamstring at the glute was being loaded on that side. So I was doing a pause in the bottom of a Romanian deadlift with 405, and that's when it tore. Mm-hmm. And that was my warm up to 495. So, and I also pre-exhausted it with like 12 sets of hamstring curls of different types. So, I mean, it wasn't like I went out like a bitch. I mean, there's a reason why it happened. And if I was handling recovery correctly, it wouldn't have happened. But that sure as fuck wouldn't have happened if I was 32.
Yeah.
Like, no, like I would have minor tweaks and stuff periodically over the 10 years prior. I think I had minor tears in both hamstrings 3 or 4 times each. but never anything like this. Like this, I immediately wanted to pass out and throw up. Like I was having an autonomic nervous system reaction to the injury. And it's the first time I ever tore anything where there's blood pooled in my calf. So there's no cosmetic damage from it. It probably is like probably a 3 out of 10 tear rather than a 1 out of 10 tear. But it was enough for me to say, it's like, okay, I'm going to have to start pausing in the bottom. I'm going to have to hold that stretch. I'm going to have to squeeze the muscle on the concentric. I can't be doing this with 400 pounds. I'm going to have to, because John Jewett tore doing 400 pound RDLs also that year. I was like, so the smartest and the best of the best will tear their hamstring. And I think Nick Walker also tore his hamstring doing Romanians with 405 in the stretch position. And it's like, this is just not that exercise to go that heavy if you're going to pause in the stretch position. But I have to relearn how to lift so that it never happens again.
Well, was it a catalyst for you to look at your sleep and all the other things too?
Oh, I knew everything was messed up. I knew everything was bad. I knew that girl was bad for business.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I had to prioritize. After that relationship, I haven't had another one. I was like, I'm too old to be juggling relationships and bodybuilding. I have to pick one. So of course I picked bodybuilding. Yeah. It's like when I retire from bodybuilding, maybe I will entertain the possibility of putting up with bullshit. But as long as I'm going to be bodybuilding, I'm not interested in bullshit.
What are you training for? What are you training for now?
So I've had a 3-year off season trying to get big enough to be competitive in 212. That my last show was my first pro show, which was the Texas Pro. And I was like 30 pounds under 212. I was like 184 the day after the show. And I came into that show a little soft. So we tried to pull some water to make me look leaner. And it just made me look flatter. And it took the cuts out of my glutes and made me look like I had smooth glutes. So like in Ken Jackson's words, I've never seen you like this before, meaning that I've always had good conditioning for 12 years. He's seen me competing. And I've always had some cuts on my glutes. The first time I ever don't have cuts on my glutes, it's at that pro show. And then the next day I'm 7 pounds heavier because I had Mexican and I had glute cuts. So it's like frustrating because you completely shit the bed on your pro debut. Every other body part looked good. I'm not going to lie about that. Like my profile pic on Instagram and on Facebook is my ab and thigh from that. It looks good. Like, but the glutes were too flat and I looked better the next day at 184, but nonetheless, 184 is still 30 pounds underweight. So the goal would be at least be 195 the next time I step on stage.
When do you think that will be?
So the goal would be to do it this August. Because right now I'm like 222, probably like 11% body fat. So even if we knock 20 pounds off of that, that's 202. So if we take 10 pounds off of water and intestinal contents, that puts me closer to like 192. 192 is pretty close. Yeah, it means that after 3 years off, I put on probably about 8 pounds of muscle, which is not great. But I had to relearn how to lift, and I had to relearn how to diet, and I had to relearn how to do gear because I've re-educated myself on everything. So in the last 3 years, I'm not doing anything I was doing before.
All right. So now we're getting to a point where you're going to put all those things into action.
I have been, and a lot of it is like minor fine tuning stuff. And, there's some setbacks, but a lot of people who got COVID will be more likely to get sick after that. I think in 2022, I got like 6 or 7 colds, which is really bizarre. And it was mostly because I was overtraining, because I was trying high volume, but I was still training to failure. So when you mix high volume with training to failure, I found that I got a lot of colds. And I thought it was in my head, but then I always knew Dorian did what he did because he wasn't recovering. But I actually saw what he said in an interview where he said, I found myself not recovering. I kept getting head colds. And I was like, motherfuck, it isn't in my head. I mean, it is in my head because it's a head cold, but it isn't something I'm imagining that I really do get colds from overtraining. It's not that I'm getting joint problems. It's not that I'm super sore. It's not sleep disturbance. I'm just really prone to upper respiratory infections. And then now I'm fucked and I can't really grow if I'm sick because you can't train the same. So what I found was I pretty much dialed it in. So I know exactly what exercises I have good SFR in. I know exactly how to do my split so I can recover in time for every body part. I pretty much know my volume for every body part, for my MRV at least. So I know what the upper limit is. I know which rep ranges each muscle responds to well. With this, I know how to do the RIR so I can judge mid-set exactly how many reps in reserve I have based on the velocity of the concentric phase. I pretty much have the diet down cold. And then I finally found out exactly how to run the PEDs perfect. Whereas I did 3 years of serial blood work, testing test versus primo and how much E2 do I get? And with that much E2 and this much GH, how much IGF-1 do I get versus using Masteron? And if I have this ratio of 2-to-1, this is what my E2 is going to be. If I have a ratio of 1-to-2, this is what my E2 is going to be. If I have, and I have it figured out pretty good. And it turns out I was using way too little gear. So for so many years, the most I'd ever run in the off season was about 1,500 milligrams. And my blood works was perfectly good on 2,400 milligrams. So I was running way too little gear for way too long. And now I know I can get away with a lot more because my blood work and my health markers are better now than they were 2 years ago on less gear.
So how does more gear yield a greater result?
I don't know if it does. You mean like how does it for building muscle? All right. So if I'm at 1,400 milligrams and I'm still I can get as heavy as 220 in the off season, and then I'm still dieting down to approximately 180, and that goes on for 5 years, then using more gear in theory will help you gain more muscle. Because in theory, gaining more muscle past that 1.4 grams or 1.5 grams is too difficult. That I'm beyond my genetic maximum. The only reason why I have as much muscle as I do is because of how much gear I'm running. So to raise that artificial maximum amount of muscle you can carry, you have to increase the stimulus to have that tissue.
Yeah.
So by going from 1.5 grams to 2 grams, I immediately started getting bigger. When I went from 2 grams to 2.4 grams, I started getting bigger. When I went from 2.4 grams to 3 grams, I started getting bigger. Eating the same calories. I was basically getting bigger and leaner at the same time. Now, if I was to eat more, I would get even bigger. But that's the big thing, is how much do you want to add? Because at some point, you can't eat more rice. You can't eat more chicken. You have to add sugar, liquid carbs, or oil to your food to drive up the calories. But actual whole foods has a cap out effect. For me, 5 meals at a half a pound of meat and 300 grams of rice, that's pretty much as I'm going to be able to eat.
All right. So if there's a total gear threshold, right? Just throw something out there. And what if somebody's well over that? Right. So if you've been taking it for a decade or whatever, and then that's where it is now, what if it's somebody that's just been on for a year? Is that threshold? In other words, what you're saying, is it going to apply? If somebody's just been taking gear for a year and they're making progress on 500 milligrams.
Right.
They can sit here and listen to this and think, fuck, I need to be taking 3 grams.
Well, that's a big difference. So like what I'm saying is, if you know for a fact, which it'd be very hard to know, but if you knew for a fact, you're not going to get anything more out of 600 milligrams, then go up to 700 milligrams.
But how would they know that? Right. Cause you were in serial blood work, right?
Right. Well, that's more like this. So you're eating 3,500 calories, let's say, and you go up 5 pounds over, let's say, a month, and it's all fat. You didn't gain any muscle. Your lifts didn't go up. You're doing everything right. You're sleeping 8 hours a day. You're training to failure. The gear's real. You got it third-party tested. If you're gaining weight, but you're not gaining any muscle, you probably need more gear to make use of that weight gain. So if you then increase your gear, but keep yourself at 3,500 calories, the next month you gain like 2 pounds of muscle and 3 pounds of fat. Now you're getting something out of that gear, and that might last 6 months before you need to use more gear. It might not be based on time. It might be about weight. Like I simply can't gain more than 180 pounds of lean tissue on 1.5 grams. But once I go up to 2 grams, then maybe I can get up to 185 pounds of lean tissue before I'm at a new maximum. And this is a new concept to me. I never really took any stock in this, that in theory, if you look at most of the experts, they'll say that 600 milligrams gives you the maximum benefit. Anything over that's a waste. You never need more than 600 milligrams. That's because no one's ever tested more than 600 milligrams. And no one's ever done tests on subjects for more than 12 weeks. And then who are they testing? They're not testing pro bodybuilders.
No.
They're testing regular people. So since the 3 parameters are non-applicable, then it's a completely invalid study for our population. So I'm not suggesting people should go out and take more anabolics, but there is a safe way of doing it. And it happens. The blood work is an important feature, but not all blood work is created equal. Like, people say, oh, I got a full panel. My doctor gave me a full panel. I'm like, what doctor? A primary care doctor? His idea of a full panel is a CBC, a comprehensive metabolic panel, maybe a lipid profile, maybe a urinalysis. None of that's relevant. It doesn't apply. It's not valid. The GGT is the correct test for the liver in a lifter. The cystatin C is the correct test for the kidneys in the lifter. ApoB is a good test for cholesterol in everybody. But you can save so much money by just getting the right tests rather than getting the cheap screening test for $9 and then having to go back. Just get the right test. And then it's like, people say, oh, my hematocrit and hemoglobin's high. I'm like, how much water did you drink? Oh, none. I was like, okay, well, drink a gallon of water and get that redone and you'll be fine. And then so many guys have their primary care doctor selling them off for phlebotomy, and they're giving blood every 3-6 months to get rid of extra red blood cells when they're just dehydrated when they get the blood work done. And it's not that there's no reason to do that. And so yes, there's a safe way of doing stuff, yes, you could use blood work to, in theory, determine if you're healthy, but you're going to get way more false positives for disease with blood work than you will get actual positives. That they're going to see your creatinine's high. They're going to say you got kidney disease. Bullshit. That's your muscle mass is your creatinine. Mm-hmm. They're going to see your ALT and AST are high. They're going to say you got kidney disease. Bullshit. That's high because you lift weights. It's like they're going to see your hematocrit and hemoglobin are high. So they're going to say you've got overdose in testosterone. Bullshit. You just didn't drink enough water. Now, is it possible you could have kidney disease? Sure. Maybe use ibuprofen. Is it possible you have liver disease? Yeah, if you use oral steroids, but injectable steroids aren't going to cause liver disease, except for bizarre situations. Is it possible you got cholesterol problems? Sure. Probably because of your diet, and it's probably not related to your gear. It's related to the diet. And if you're eating McDonald's 3 times a day to gain weight, then you're going to have fucked up blood work because of the diet you're eating to gain weight. And you wouldn't be doing that if you weren't on steroids. So there's a correlation, but it's not causality.
So what markers do you look at?
So like I use the cystatin C for the kidneys, GGT for the liver. I make sure they're super hydrated so that their CBC isn't all messed up, so that their hematocrit and hemoglobin are normal. I use ApoB for cholesterol. I mean, I still look at the HDL and the LDL, but if the HDL is low, it doesn't matter if your LDL is low too, because the HDL is only there to make a good value for your LDL. I really don't pay much attention to the testosterone so much, even because everybody's going to have a different expression. But typically, I'm not concerned if it's 1500. A lot of labs cut it off at 1500, but there's nothing wrong with being at 1500. As far as E2, E2 is an important one because if it's too high, there's consequences. If it's too low, there's consequences. People aren't paying enough attention to their estradiol. And then the estradiol factors into your IGF-1 level. So most people don't order the IGF-1, so they don't know whether their GH is even working. There's people who don't even use GH, which blows my mind because GH is kind of more important than testosterone. So the GH and the E2 will beget the IGF-1 levels. And that's a good, is systemic IGF-1 really indicative of anabolic potential? Not necessarily, but if systemic IGF-1 is adjusted by 40%, then that means that the local IGF-1 is probably also adjusted by 40%. So we may not be able to measure local IGF-1, but we can measure systemic IGF-1. And I can use systemic IGF-1 as a proxy for what I can anticipate the local IGF-1 to be doing in the environment we created.
So you're looking at that more than you are the testosterone level.
For sure. Yeah. Because yes, testosterone does a lot of stuff, but here's the thing. I'm not a proponent of running testosterone as a growth anabolic anyway. To me, the testosterone is a prohormone to estradiol. And estradiol's purpose is to convert GH over to IGF-1. That to me, you would run an actual anabolic to drive up your primary load. So a lot of people like to use test and primo, and that makes sense because primo metabolite converts into an AI, and the AI mitigates some of the effects of the test. So if you're running a 1-to-1 ratio of test to primo, you typically are going to have, and your typical person will have a 40 estradiol, which is great. It's very good. It's healthy. It's in the upper end of the normal range. Me personally, I convert GH to IGF-1 better at a 100 estradiol. Anything over 100 estradiol, I get no benefit. If I bring that estradiol down at all, then I'm going to have a decrease in IGF-1. Even as little as 10 milligrams of primo a day can have a drastic change to my IGF-1. So if I was to be at a 100 estradiol and I added 10 milligrams of primo a day, I went from 20 to 30, let's say, then my estradiol would decrease all the way down to 86. If I was to increase both the test and the primo again, let's say 20 tests a day more and 10 more primo a day, it would drop my E2 down to 70. So I get almost exactly 15-point decreasement from 100 down for every 10 milligrams of primo I add per day. On the other hand, Masteron doesn't do that for me. So I can run Masteron as a purely neutral anabolic that drives up total anabolic load, has no DHT conversion, so has no actual hair loss effect, and doesn't have any of the aggression effect. It also won't have any conversion to estradiol, nor would it inhibit estradiol. So whereas primo indirectly is kind of dry, Masteron's completely neutral, whereas in nandrolone will amplify aromatase expression, so the aromatase will convert more of the testosterone to estradiol. So nandrolone by itself isn't wet, but when you add nandrolone to test, now it really makes the test way wetter. So it's really hard to manage nandrolone in a cycle with test. That's why for many years I tried nandrolone only and I had great success with it. That you had not, it was perfect. Just running straight nandrolone, nothing else works great. Other people don't like it because they don't like the low sex drive. And it's like, well, if you're not trying to please a woman, if you don't have responsibilities to a woman, you don't need a sex drive. In fact, it takes away one of the, here's the best way to put it. If you ask someone why they do heroin, they'd say because they're addicted to heroin. And it's like, if I could wave a magic wand and make you no longer addicted to heroin, would you do it? They'd say yes. But for some reason, men have a sex addiction integrated into their masculinity so that they take pride in being addicted to sex. And then that addiction is a hook someone can use to manipulate you. It's like, imagine if you could just not give a shit anymore and not be distracted by the concept of sex and just focus on your goals.
So you're saying that DECA will help people focus on their goals? Yes.
If you ran just DECA and not test, you would, it's not that your dick doesn't work per se, it'll still work. And if it doesn't, you can use Viagra to make it work. But the point is you don't need to have sex. You now have the upper hand per se because your dick has more value to her than her pussy has to you. That you've changed the dynamics, the economy of genitals.
And you can get more work done.
Fuck yeah.
I need to take a bathroom break real quick.
I call it.
You guys are selecting Marek for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. So there's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are, thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk, Marek Health, for all your hormone optimization and performance. EFTS was founded in 1998 with the aim to live, learn, and pass on. We've done this through training-related content that allows you to become the strongest athlete and coach that you can. Over the past 2 decades, actually 2.5 decades, we've published more complementary training media than anybody else in the industry. When you look at the number of articles, the Q&As, the blogs, the videos, the podcasts, there's over 1 million pages of content that we've put out there. We've been able to do this through your support of Elite FTS. So when you purchase Elite FTS strength equipment, bands, accessories, gear, apparel, or anything through the site, you directly help support the content that we put out, which in turn helps support other people on their journey of becoming stronger and better coaches. So stronger athletes and better coaches, which encompasses the aim and the vision to live, learn, and pass on. So I thank you for the support that you've been giving for the past 25 years and encourage you to keep supporting Elite FTS into the future so we can all help more people become better and stronger. Discount code Table Talk for 10% off your first order. All right, guys, if you like the Table Talk podcast, then you're going to love the crew. If you're struggling with trying to get through a sticking point, you're trying to figure some specific aspect of your training out that you just can't dial in, you're dealing with injuries, you're trying to figure out how to better optimize your training, all the stuff you're seeing on social media is confusing, and all you need is a little guidance and support, or just somebody to look at your lifts to make sure that they're either heading in the right direction, or if there's a weak point in the lift, they can point out what that weak point is. Well, that's what we have the crew for. So when you join the crew, you get an extra Table Talk podcast each month called the Crewcast. You also get access to our Discord community, which has a training Q&A, form checks with top coaches, mindset section, nutrition, training logs, programs, over 30 ebooks, plus exclusive ebooks just for the crew, webinars, lectures, seminars, giveaways ranging from full strength equipment. We've given away many yoke bars this year. We've given away actually pieces of strength equipment as well as accessory items, and you get exclusive crew discounts. So go to the link in the description that says join the crew, click it, join now, and start getting stronger today. All right, guys, we've got a new limited edition drop, the original Mountain Dog tee that John Meadows had us design from the very beginning. So it's the first tee that he had made. Once again, this is a limited edition item, so when they're gone, they're gone. While I have your attention, you've seen me wear this one in a few podcasts to date. We've been holding back on it. This here, the 4-star tee, I think that's what we call it. It's on the website. New items, also under limited edition. Check out our shoulder saver pads. It's an easy way to do limited restricted range of motion exercises like board press that basically you just pop the pad on the bar, reduces the range of motion, pop it back off when you're done. Thank you guys for the support. Head over to elitefts.com. So I want to circle back to a couple things. So there were a couple of notes that I made here. Is you were talking, where I want to go. You were talking about daily dose, right? So I assume that you're talking sub-Q.
No, everybody draws that conclusion.
Yes,
because I don't know where that got started. So I can talk about the difference between sub-Q and IM, or I can talk about why I like every day. Is there a particular area?
Yeah.
So I like every day because the graph is going to be smoother. And I know that seems esoteric and abstract, but there's ups and downs, even with long-acting esters. And the amplitude of difference between the peak and the trough is where you fit the side effects in. that variability. If you could get a completely smooth line, your body would be cool. It wouldn't know anything was wrong. But this up and down shit is why Tren gives people mood swings. It's why people get estrogen side effects. So the whole concept of decreasing the amplitude is either doing once a day injections or even twice a day injections, which people are going to, that's fucking absurd. But the point is that you would smooth that out so there'd be no excess conversion to DHT and no excess conversion to E2. When there's a huge surge in it, your body's like, what the fuck do I do with all this testosterone? It immediately starts converting it over to DHT and E2. So throughout the given day, you have like different conversion rates. So your aromatase expression might get upregulated. And so when they're doing 2 shots a week, dramatically worse side effects than 1 shot every day. And 100% of the time I convert someone from this barbaric system of doing some arbitrary amount of milliliters, because they don't measure, most of these people don't measure stuff in milligrams. They measure it, I do a half a cc or I do a whole cc every 3 days or every 2 days. Then there's these huge peaks and valleys. And they're like, not with long-acting esters. Yes, with long-acting esters. Yes, with long-acting esters. It's still up and down. It's not a dramatic to you, but it is up and down. Even if you did prop every day, it's going to be up and down. So even an athlete every day is going to be, there is some up and down. We want to get that, minimize that to minimize the side effects from minimizing conversion. Now, the concept behind the sub-Q injections is that because there's less vascularity in fat tissue than there is in muscle tissue, it's going to absorb slower. So we flatten the curve. We've all heard that expression before.
Oh, yeah.
Let's flatten the curve of testosterone and do sub-Q. Okay. Let's say that would work. What would that do? Well, you've got smoother, if you were going to do 2 shots a week, it'll look like this. So you've flattened the curve because you're doing so few injections per week. But if you're doing everyday injections, you pretty much don't need to do sub-Q. Here's the other problem. Not everyone has enough fat to handle a sub-Q injection. So what they're going to get is you're going to get a lump under the skin, and they're going to get a skin irritation. So now you've got inflammation there. So now you've got improved blood flow. So now is it any less blood flow? Now it's more blood flow. We completely obviated the thing. We've also damaged the skin. So if you're a bodybuilder, your skin is a very important body part that no one ever trains, right? No one ever thinks like, what's the skin condition? Well, if you're wrinkled or tatted or pimply, you're going to lose. If you've got scar tissue or stretch marks, it's going to hurt you. So for 44, I've got really fucking awesome skin. It's one of my best weapons. Is that my face looks old, but the rest of my body looks relatively young because I just have good skin. And so that's a huge part of being shredded and grainy on stage is your skin. So if you have like Shar-Pei skin, you're not going to do as good as someone who's got super thin skin that isn't wrinkled. And just like skin color really has a huge impact too. So by injecting the skin, you're fucking up your skin. And that's the other thing is I use insulin syringes every day unless I'm going well over a cc a day. That's the only time I think you would want to use a hypodermic syringe is if you're going to go multiple cc's every day. That's when the patience of doing 2 insulin pins at 29 gauge versus 1 IM pin at 27 gauge, then I'm going to lead to the 1 IM pin of 27 gauge with the hypodermic syringe. But you can do an insulin syringe in the delts, in the triceps, in the quad, and it's not very deep in the skin. I mean, it's not very deep in the muscle. It's still closer to the surface of the muscle, but you're still going to absorb it faster and then in the skin than injecting it sub-Q, and it's also not going to cause inflammation like you'll get with the sub-Q. A lot of people even get inflammation on their skin when they do GH and their insulin shots. Now, I personally have always done insulin and GH in the muscle, and I could talk for an hour and a half just about GH and GH timing and GH brands and GH methods of it, like why IM's different all the way down to the atomic level, because that's one of my favorite subjects is growth hormone. But and I've got a lot of videos on my YouTube channel about it, and specifically in the Advanced Discussion Show with Kurt Havens. But in the end, I'm one of the only people I know that's a really hard and fast, strict guy about everyday injections in the muscle and using an insulin syringe. And the only time I would actually say the hypodermic syringe would make sense would be if you're using more than a cc a day.
Well, that's assuming that they're not fat as fuck.
Well, if they can't reach the muscle, they don't have a choice. But if they can't reach the muscle, like in other words, the needle won't get into the muscle because it gets stuck in the fat, then there's enough fat to absorb all that oil.
I get what you're saying. So either way.
Yeah. You do your best. And then people are like, well, if you inject into the muscle, it leaks into the fat. I'm like, so what's your solution? Just inject the fat anyway? Then what difference does it make? Like, how does one obviate the other? It's just do your best.
Right. Then whenever anybody's speaking about Primo and some of the other compounds, there's a lot of people that are listening and that are using the compounds. They may not actually be taking Primo,
right? Because
they're buying shit from the dude at the gym.
I find that that's almost no longer the case because of how popular Primo has gotten in the last couple of years. Now there is enough sophistication that people are sending it to get third-party tested, that they can bust a dealer, then the dealer's reputation is ruined. So every drug manufacturer or dealer, we're going to call them manufacturer because I want to treat them with respect. Because in my opinion, the underground labs are not, at least currently in 2023, they're not drug dealers. They're alternative medicine sources for people that can't get access to the medicine they need due to ignorant government regulation on certain drugs and not others. Like, why is Primo illegal and Anadrol is legal? Like, clearly they have no fucking idea what they're doing. You know? It's like, I think you were mentioning, you may have to cut this out, but that the flavoring on tobacco is illegal because vape flavoring's illegal. It's like, stupid fucks. It's the popcorn lung caused by the flavor agents in the vaping is why it's illegal. It doesn't hurt you if it's in chewing gum. What the fuck difference does it make at that point? And they're like, well, we made the flavoring illegal. It's like, oh my fucking God. How are you fucking allowed to breathe with like there's a certain point where your IQ is so low that you stop having autonomic functioning. And that's what I think politicians are at that point. Like if the president can't make it through a speech without shitting his pants, then why am I surprised that people are going to outlaw flavored gum because it has flavoring because some kids might vape? And so the same thing is like, what stupid fuck thinks an Anadrol is a better choice than Primo? And it's like, well, it's been proven to raise red blood cells. I was like, yeah. And it's like, so it's for anemia. It's like, this motherfucker is not for anemia. And it's like, same thing with the Primo. It's like, well, Primo's for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It's like, no, it's not. It's for growing muscle. They just fudged that because they needed to get approval for it. So they made up some bullshit and tested that group. It's like, Masteron, it's for breast cancer. You don't have breasts. Why would you take Masteron? It's like, oh my God, just because it works in breast cancer doesn't mean it doesn't grow muscle too. And so the way that they test these drugs to get them approved for something so they can cash in on them and get them on the competitive market is they can't just do redundancy. Each company comes out with a different drug to cash in on that market. So they have to indicate that there's some advantage to that drug or place. So for example, tamoxifen versus Clomid. Clomid was made to be breast cancer meds. It just sucked. It didn't work. So it couldn't get approval to compete with tamoxifen because tamoxifen was just better. So they're like, well, let's give it to men. And so they got it approved to give it to men. That doesn't mean tamoxifen is not better for men too. COVID's just a shit drug. I mean, not COVID, Clomid's just a shit drug. And some people are like, well, no, the evidence shows blah, 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 blah. Maybe you have a study that shows that Clomid is better for men than tamoxifen. But when you take into consideration that there was an ulterior motive, that they wanted to prove that it was better for men, then they can fudge the method section and set it up in such a way that it proves their point. So it's not necessarily reliable just because one study says something, because they have a for-profit reason for fudging the data. You can pay the scientist for the result, and then he'll design the methods that'll generate that result. That's kind of how that business works.
Yeah.
So especially with the pharmaceutical company, we're talking in the billions. There's no reason for there to be any ethics at that point. So back on the topic of the UGLs are going to probably get their hands on real Primo at this point because Primo's now so popular that it's just stupid of them to have, they get caught one time with bullshit and it's going to be all over message boards. No one's ever going to buy that brand again. As a business owner, you can't just fuck over customers and expect them not to haunt you. Certainly not in the information age.
Yeah.
You got to do good business practices. Whether it's in a GMP facility or not, it has to be good business practices.
What would make one compound better for strength than another one?
That I don't know. I think Anadrol is better for strength because that's what I've heard anecdotally. My personal experience is I got more of a strength benefit out of Anavar and Tren, even though that doesn't even make any sense.
Well, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is why?
I guess nervous system activation. So the DHT is supposed to help facilitate the neuromuscular junction. So the afferent nerve fibers, I think the motor A1 fibers, the widest diameter fibers, act on the neuromuscular junction by releasing acetylcholine, which binds to the nicotinic receptors, and then that causes the contraction of the muscle fiber. So I think that I don't know mechanically where the DHT actually facilitates that occurrence, but I believe that if you can squeeze 100% of the muscle fibers you will get more force production than if you hit 50% of the fibers now and 50% later.
So wouldn't it hypothetically make more sense to only take that on the days that they would need to express that strength?
Which is why I always say that I can see why someone would use Anadrol before the meet, but I don't see a point to Anadrol or any other time. That I don't think that running it through weeks would make sense, except for it would probably fuck up your periodization to have undulating strength.
Yeah.
So that's why they use it consistently. But then you're also going to fuck up your organs and where.
Well, would it be undulating strength if it's, a heavy squat day once a week leading into the last 5 squat workouts?
Right. And that's why I would always prefer Anavar sublingually. That Anavar sublingually can bypass the liver, goes directly to the muscle. Plus, when you take Anavar sublingually, instead of having an 8-hour half-life, it has closer to a 1-hour half-life. What does that mean? It's like, well, it means it's in your blood for an hour, not for 9 hours. That doesn't mean it just ceases to exist. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It had to go somewhere. So in all likelihood, it's not in the blood because it's in the muscle. We actually got the Anavar where we wanted it to go because we did it pre-training. So sublingual Anavar while you're driving in the gym, either crushing up an Anavar and sticking it under your tongue. I think through Fusion, the HRT clinic I work with, there's a sublingual tabs that are dissolvable you can put under your tongue, and that'll actually give you the strength output you want. So to me, being purely logical and not having competed in powerlifting a very long time, like 12, 13 years, I would think that sublingual Anavar would be a safer, better option the day of the meet. So you have an unreasonable amount of extra strength so you don't miss any lifts. You're not going to calculate in superhuman strength because you're just trying to break your PR that day.
Yeah, but every meathead out there is going to think I'm going to use it on my heavy days.
Right, which is going to just fuck up the whole system because now your joints are getting extra wear and tear. You're not actually stronger. You're just moving more weight. Your joints are getting much more wear and tear. So whatever lagging or nagging injuries are going to be exacerbated leading into that meet. And now you're more likely to have extreme pain on meet day. And pain, no matter how tough you are, pain is going to inhibit the spinal cord. So the signal goes from the afferent nerve fiber into the spinal cord. Before it goes up to the central nervous system, like your conscious mind, I mean, technically the spinal cord is the central nervous system, but before it moves up to your brain and you can choose to ignore the pain, the spinal cord decides for you to push less force through the afferent fiber so that there's less force against the bar, so there's less force back into the wrist or the shoulder or the elbow. So the presence of pain inhibits strength directly without free will. So being super aggressive, like with adrenaline or anger, like DHT, can override that to a certain extent. So that's why if you're super pissed, you don't even feel pain. because you've got the adrenaline going and you're stronger that way. But I think a lot of the reason why you're stronger with adrenaline is because you're not pain inhibited.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where does Tren fall into this? Because the power lifters will lean more towards that because they'll say it's more of a strength.
I think it has to do with more brain damage, that you have more brain damage with Tren. So you have more anger. So I believe specifically it's either the amygdala directly or near the amygdala there's going to be more beta pleated sheets accumulated. So wouldn't
that play into the same issues that you're talking about with the anadrol, the full cycle though?
Right. So with the Tren, that if doses over 5 milligrams a day, you're going to get an anti-cortisol effect. Now, the cortisol receptors in the brain protect it. And so as you use more Tren, you're taking away protection from the brain. Then the other thing is Tren makes it harder to sleep through a couple of different mechanisms. One of which is it's an uncoupler in the mitochondria, and it leaks energy out of the mitochondria, kind of like DNP does. That's how it's good for fat loss. Another way that it's good for fat loss is it inhibits TBG, thyroid binding globulin. So it inhibits the conversion of, basically it amplifies the amount of T3s that's available and present, which will result in less sleep. Now, when you don't sleep, you don't clear beta pleated sheets. And beta pleated sheets, as they accumulate in your brain, I think in this case, it's the hippocampus or the amygdala. They're next to each other, so they kind of overlap to some degree. What you'll get is Alzheimer's disease when you're older. That's the biggest hallmark feature of Alzheimer's disease, is a huge accumulation of beta pleated sheets. So in theory, you can mitigate the risk of Alzheimer's by getting good sleep, which means that Tren can lead to Alzheimer's. Tren can also lead to direct brain damage because of the inhibition of the cortisol's protection. How does that manifest in the lifter? Well, the amygdala is the emotional control and anger part of the brain. And if you have brain damage to this emotional control, then you're going to be more prone to explosive rage. So, I mean, I think anyone who's used Tren knows that with Tren, there's no buffer. That normally you'd be able to just tolerate something irritating and it's no big deal. With Tren, something's on your nerves, like the dog barks and you scream at it. Like you will be prone to an act of violence prior to even considering the act of violence. You just act. And then you watch yourself as a third person doing something abhorrent that you're ashamed of. And there's nothing you can do to stop it because it's already over. That it's kind of like that situation where you're in an actual fight. You feel nothing. You're not thinking. You're not fighting tactically. You're just throwing punches or throwing objects. And you're watching yourself as a third person. And you practically don't even remember what happened. And your friends have to tell you how it went afterward. That's kind of like what is being on Tren all the time. And I believe that is one of those forms of brain damage that are common with Tren. That's great when it comes to lifting weights. You're so much more likely to lift like an animal, an enraged beast, but it doesn't turn off. So back to what you were saying is, would you be wise just to inject Tren right before the meet? Same thing could be said for Halo possibly. And that's why I think Halo and Tren are so popular right before a meet. I don't know what the window of time is to maximize the benefit and minimize the risk, whether it's 3 days of Tren and a day of Halo or 3 days. I know that for bodybuilding, it's supposed to be before the show. The last 6 weeks, you're on Tren. The last couple days, you're on Halo once you pull all injectables, because you don't want to run the risk of fucking up your skin. Because if you have a lump under the skin, you're going to get dinged. You're going to lose a placing.
Would you see any difference in, if it's a strength athlete, you work with strength athletes and bodybuilders as well, should their cycle be any different than what a bodybuilder's off-season cycle would be? Because aren't they basically trying to accomplish the same goals?
Yeah, I mean,
kind of.
A bodybuilder's goal is to put on mass.
Yeah.
The strength is virtually irrelevant. The powerlifter's goal often is to stay within the same weight class and just gain strength. And I don't know that there's any pharmacological way to permanently increase strength, just temporary increase strength. So to me, the strength drugs like halotestin or Tren or Anadrol make sense the day of the meet or the week of the meet, no other time. Because by being stronger while you're training, you're actually not training your nervous system to get stronger. It's kind of like letting the drugs do the work for you. You are also damaging the joints and connective tissue. So you'll be in more pain the day of the lift, which means you have less.
Yeah.
You have more inhibition on it. I would want so back to your question is it different? If the powerlifter wants to go up a weight class, it is not different. Their accessory work and nutrition would all be based off of hypertrophy. Their training would be periodized with their big lifts to build up to a peak strength output. And of course, the hypertrophy shouldn't get in the way of that progression.
Well, let me rephrase the question then, because this is where I'm leading is the PEDs for the strength athlete should be based on recovery, right, helping them recover from their sessions, because their training should be smart, not fucking stupid, and to be able to progress through there. So how would that cycle be different than the bodybuilding cycle trying to put on muscle?
I really don't think it'd be that different, except for it'd be less. So I just don't think a powerlifter needs to use as much, because at what point do you maximize recovery? And is that point less than the point where you could maximize hypertrophy? And the answer is probably yes. That you probably could get away with 250 tests a week and get most of the recovery benefits you're ever going to get. I don't know how much more benefit you're going to get, like some EQ or some DECA, because it's going to have some collagen synthesis to help with recovery in that capacity. You know, EQ is going to be relatively drier because it's got an AI metabolite, whereas DECA is going to amplify estradiol conversion. So if someone's running 250 tests and maybe 300 or 400 DECA, that might help with recovery and the joint recovery and have the anti-cortisol effect of the DECA, although that could be a downside. We might want to use EQ, might have to use more tests to be able to handle EQ. But I don't know if you need to use a gram or more than a gram of gear just to recover from workouts.
All right. Well, this is also under the assumption that their diet is on point.
Well, right. And that's a big assumption. And I would say, like, okay, if you're going to have a conversation about gear, you have to assume all the other variables are fixed. And then that we have perfect sleep, perfect diet, perfect job stress, perfect relationship stress. So we got a zero stress at work, zero stress with your girlfriend or wife, zero stress with your kids. You're getting 8 hours or more of sleep. You're getting 2 gallons of water, 10 grams of salt, unless you got hypertension issues or kidney disease. You're getting all your calories you need from all whole food sources, getting all your micronutrients accounted for, vegetables, perfect bowel digestion, perfect colonic health. Like everything's perfect. Then now gear is something you would use. And then in that case, I think that the daily injections, intramuscular of test and GH at the correct ratios based off of your E2 output and your IGF-1 conversion, maximize that IGF-1 conversion. Once that IGF-1 conversion is maximized, don't need anything else.
Now, if all those other variables, because in the real world, all those other variables are not on point.
Right.
Right. And then the drugs come in like a buffer, you know, but it's not really. So
I think of it's like everyone watched Fast and the Furious, at least one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, drugs are like the nitrous. So if you're a shit driver in a shit car, the nitrous ain't going to help. If you punch the nitrous too fast before you've started your turn, you're not going to pull through the turn. You're just going to rock it into the barrier. So if you need to master the skills of food and stress management and recovery before you ever start playing with using gear at a performance enhancement level. At a hormone replacement level, sure. You can get away with 20 milligrams of test and 2 units of GH every day for the rest of your life for pretty much everyone over 20 years old. You know, everyone over 40. Everyone over 40 could use 20 milligrams of test and 2 units of GH safely, effectively, and it will facilitate everything in a very good way. You start pushing harder than that, then you're focusing on the wrong shit. So, sometimes I don't have perfect sleep, but I do everything right. Like I've got a sleep hygiene video with 8 different steps of sleep hygiene, and I do everything right, but it ain't gonna budge. And the same thing with the food thing. It's like my food isn't perfect, but that's not perfect by professional bodybuilder standards. Other people would think I'm absolutely insane when it comes to how diligent I am about food. Stress management, don't have a girlfriend, don't have relationship stress. It's a crude way of like, my arm hurts. What am I going to do? Cut it off. Now it doesn't hurt anymore. It's like the same thing with the job management. It's job stress. It's like, I don't have a boss. I'll own my own businesses. It took me 15 years to figure this shit out. But now that I'm the boss of my own life, I don't have any job stress. So once you've mastered stress, and once you've mastered sleep, and once you've mastered food, and once you've mastered training, and training is a process. As you get bigger, you have to change your lifts. Your rep ranges go up as you get stronger because it becomes harder and harder and harder to recover from heavier loads. But the gear thing is relatively easy to dial in once you do it the right way. And you introduce the test, you modulate the E2 with the Primo. If you need more of an androgen load, you can add in something neutral like a Masteron and drive that up. And the GH is a big driver too, is affording GH and sourcing affordable GH that's real GH is a huge thing in and of itself. And then using that GH to get the best benefit without having too much of the side effects like narcolepsy, where you fall asleep in the middle of the day for no reason, carpal tunnel or tingling in your hands, and you can't, to the point where you can't hold dumbbells. At that point, you're using too much GH. Or if you cap out your IGF-1 response at 6 units of GH and you go all the way up to 12 and you're side effect free, if you can afford it and there's no side effects, maybe you should use 12, because we don't really know what's happening at the tissue level. We only know what's happening at the liver level. And the liver IGF-1 isn't going to grow muscle like the tissue IGF-1. But we can't measure the tissue IGF-1. We can only measure the liver IGF-1. So we've got a proxy, and we can assume that there's a relationship, a correlation. We probably don't think that if the liver IGF-1 is going up, the tissue isn't going down. But just because the liver isn't going up anymore doesn't mean there isn't a benefit at the tissue level, especially from direct means of the GH causing anabolism, which used to be believed was impossible, but actually it turns out there is actually some mechanisms that does work.
What about insulin?
Insulin it's interesting because insulin is a way of controlling and facilitating the carbs. So a lot of people see a relationship between the insulin and the GH. I think if everything's perfect, your blood glucose doesn't go up from using more GH. I think that that's more of an artifact. There's a correlation, but I don't think it's causality. I think that people's blood sugar goes up as they use more GH because they're using more food. And that it's not an isolated variable. They're not just having the same fixed training, the same fixed sleep, the same fixed life stress, the same fixed drug load, the same fixed calories and food, and then they just double their GH. I don't think they're going to see as much of an increase in blood glucose as they think.
So what would be the point of post-workout insulin?
Because you're going to have post-workout carbs, and you want to shove that into the muscle while they're open so that you're hungry again sooner to get in your next meal. So to me, insulin's function in a bodybuilder or possibly in a powerlifter is a appetite facilitator. If you eat 200 carbs and your stomach is full, you're going to be hungry again in maybe 4 hours. If you were to shoot insulin with that, you might be hungry again in 2 hours. And the cool thing about this is, if you use insulin without GH, you're probably going to store in the fat and the muscle. But it seems that when you use GH, because the IGF-1 can bind to the insulin receptor, and it isn't necessarily stimulatory, and the insulin can stimulate the IGF-1 receptor marginally, but the IGF-1 doesn't really stimulate the insulin receptor. So if you flood the system with enough systemic IGF-1, it's binding to these fat cells. And then when the carbs enter the system and the insulin's in the system, the insulin isn't really going to stimulate the fat cells to take up the carbs. The hungry muscles will take up the carbs.
So then would the intra use of the insulin just be able to drive more calories in?
For the most part. Now, I do see a performance in pump when I use insulin pre-Humalog specifically, but that's probably just because there's carbs going into the muscle, not because it's actually making me lift more weight, but because I have more carbs going into the muscle as the workout persists.
Is that because of the carbs, or is it because the insulin's helping to drive the carbs?
I think it's the insulin driving the carbs, because if I have the same amount of insulin, if I have the same amount of carbs, 90 carbs intra-workout, and I use 5 units of insulin before I train, I'll get a good pump, and my workout will start going to shit after maybe 45 minutes or an hour. If I go up to 10 units of insulin, I'll have a better pump, and my workout will be better for longer. So let's say I'm doing a set of triceps, and I get 15, 13, 10. You know, like the first set is short of failure. The second set, I fail at 13. I couldn't match the 15. And the third set, I've got 10 reps. I failed way early. If I was using more insulin, I might get 15, 15, 13, which to me is pretty dramatic difference.
So it's a training stimulus, not a recovery stimulus.
Well, the pre-training one is.
Yes.
Then the post-training is recovery.
Because the carbs are getting there sooner, or just because you're getting more carbs in the day?
I think because you're getting more carbs in the day, and because you're getting them sooner. Because the sooner you hit the system with what it wants, the better the effect. Because that post-training window is it's a pretty good time. I don't want to say it's the most anabolic time, but it's definitely the most receptive time. The best conversion of GH to IGF-1, short of bedtime. You need the insulin to be anti-catabolic during that time. And you may not actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis, but the insulin and the IGF-1 will stimulate the AKT pathway, which includes mTOR. You don't necessarily need the leucine directly to stimulate mTOR, although most people are going to have leucine from either BCAAs or EAAs or whey protein post-training. If they're sophisticated enough to use insulin and carbs and GH, they're probably sophisticated enough to use leucine, or at the very least whey isolate.
So there could be a case for both, intra and post.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would do all three. Yeah.
What do you mean all three? Pre, during?
Yeah. So like my protocol is pretty complicated, but sometimes I don't do the whole thing, but you would have, let's say, chicken and rice 2 hours before you train. Then you would have probably GH and insulin pre-training. And then in the workout, you would have EAAs and, pre-training would be insulin and GH, possibly sublingual Anavar, Viagra, as well as a pre-workout drink with HCBDs. And the pre-workout would have some type of nitric oxide precursors, some type of agmatine sulfate to facilitate that. It would have 500 milligrams of sodium to open up everything, some taurine. It would probably have a plethora of other stuff. And then the intra-workout, I would have like RALA, cinnamon, chromium, so that I can open up the tissue to receive the carbohydrates through non-insulin means. Basically, make sure the GLUT4 transporter can be transcribed, make sure the GLUT4 transporter can translocate to the surface of the cell, make sure that the insulin receptors and the Janus kinase receptors, the two halves, are able to meet quickly and efficiently on the cell surface by having a soft cell wall or cell membrane, which is done with the RALA and other omega-3s. Intra-workout, you can hit it again with an IGF-1 DES or IGF-1, another short-acting IGF-1. You can hit it with an MGF. You can hit it with more Humalog, which I don't think is necessary because Humalog's a 3-hour half-life. If you're doing it before and after, you don't need it during. But you can hit it with IGF-1 during. Of course, carbohydrates and EAAs, intra. And then post, you can hit it with whey or more EAAs, more HCBDs, more Humalog, more GH, and then have more food. Because usually you don't want to have the GH shorter than 6 hours apart. But if you're using Humalog, the insulin receptor, when it's bound, is going to resensitize the tissue to receive the signal from the GH receptor. So that if the post-workout, even though you're shooting your GH and insulin at the same time, the GH, the insulin, if it's intramuscular, is going to hit your bloodstream in about 5 or 6 seconds, whereas the GH will hit your bloodstream in about an hour. So but even though you shoot them at the same time, by the time they kick in, it's staggered anyway.
All right. So now we're getting into the timing of GH.
Right.
Right. So that there's morning, there's evening, you know what I'm saying? So
right.
it's all going to be dependent upon whatever they're trying to achieve. Correct?
Yeah. This one's a really complicated one, and it's going to piss some people off. Oh boy, are people going to get pissed off about this. So let's first define GH. GH is 191 amino acids. The type that's used synthetically is 22.1246 kilodaltons. So what that means is there's a 192 variant GH, and if that molecule is broken into pieces, it's no longer going to be 22 kilodaltons. There's different tissue types that make different GHs, whether it's placental, like fetal GH, what the baby is exposed to, versus the GH that's meant autocrine. There's actually GH made in the testicles that works on the testicles. It's super complicated in that regard, but that's not relevant to injectable GH. Injectable GH is one thing, 191 amino acids, 22 kilodaltons. There is a belief that pharma-grade GH is better than generic GH. The use of the word generic is pejorative. So they call underground labs anabolics underground labs, but they call underground labs GH generic. So it's disrespectful in and of itself right out the gate. There is a scientist who went from America to China and went to, I believe, one of the companies. I probably shouldn't say the name, but there are 5 different companies in China that can make this stuff. And they started teaching the correct mechanism of making GH to one of these 5 companies. And that was making actual 191, 22 kilodalton GH. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you get these blue tops, the red tops, the yellow tops. It's all garbage. But since that time, now in 2023, all 5 of the major manufacturing places in China are making the exact same stuff, which is the same stuff the other pharmaceutical companies, the one in, I believe Serostim is made in Switzerland, and I believe Genotropin is made in Belgium. And there's the stuff that's made in China is very similar, down to the excipients. So I have excipient lists from each of these different companies as what they put into the GH on top of the GH itself to see how it works and what it does with it. Whether they use mannitol, which is a diuretic, whether they use other things. And in the end, the biggest difference between all the different brands, whether they're Chinese or European manufactured, is the excipients, not the actual parent hormone itself. I've even so far is to have the same batch of GH tested in China, and I have the reports in Chinese with the mag spec, and then I had them tested again in one of the major US facilities, and they came out the same. It's, in fact, there's a little bit of strand breakage. So remember how I said the 191 GH doesn't actually, there's multiple different versions of GH depending on where the break is. So if something says it's 98% pure GH, that doesn't mean the other 2% is lead or mercury. What it means is that 98% of that GH is the right molecule, the 191. The other 2% is at some point in the handling of it, they've broken those strands. And so 2% of those strands are broken. So it's not on a shipping container from China over to the US. You could put on a plane and it's flown here. So it doesn't take that long to get here. It doesn't get, the heat thing doesn't really matter. Whether it's refrigerated in transit doesn't really matter. It has to be refrigerated after it's reconstituted because it's reconstituted in water, and water grows bacteria quickly. But there's no evidence that it can be jostled or shaken or any of that bullshit. And if you actually read the package inserts, on most of the actual farm grade stuff, they don't see to refrigerate it before you use it. Then when you follow the directions for mixing it, there's going to be bubbles the way they do it. I mean, a lot of them are in pens already reconstituted, or you reconstitute them yourself and you're supposed to refrigerate them or discard them, whatever. So most of the myths about GH are just false. So that being said, when do you shoot it? Most of the belief about how to use these drugs comes from the test group tested by the manufacturing company. So let's use Serostim, for example. Serostim is the gold standard, top of the line, made in Switzerland, manufactured in Massachusetts. It's the one that people consider to be the very best. It has the least amount of excipients. It has sucrose and phosphoric acid. So the phosphoric acid helps it dissolve faster, and the sucrose makes it's 41 milligrams of sucrose, 6 milligrams of the actual growth hormone. So that's because there's not enough growth hormone to actually fill the container. So you have 41, the sucrose doesn't really matter what it is. It's just there as a caking agent. It dissolved, and you're supposed to shoot the entire bottle of 18 units before bed subcutaneously. And that's supposed to prevent wasting from HIV. It was manufactured and approved for HIV specifically. That's how it gets approved. It's not like the government's just going to be cool with everyone making the same product. So if they're all using a third-party product, and then the only thing they're changing are the excipients, the way they get FDA approved is they say, well, our drug's for this disease, and our drug's for this disease, and our drug's for this disease, when really it's the same drug. It's just you're saying it's used for it. Yeah. So the route of administration and the amount used and when is what makes it special for HIV. That's according to, I hope I don't quote him wrong, according to Kurt Haven, who is getting his MD, PhD double degree. He said that if you inject the whole thing at once at night, because we have a better conversion of IGF-1 at night, and we also release more of the binding protein 3, which is a good facilitator that hangs on to that and makes it last longer, you'll get a higher IGF-1 level, basically a better anti-catabolic effect. You'll lose less muscle if you're already wasting, specifically for AIDS and why AIDS patients are losing muscle if you shoot the whole thing at night. And because it's sub-Q, we flatten the curve. So if it has a 4-hour half-life, but it takes 3 hours to peak concentration, and we have more BP3 available, now that curve gets extended out. So instead of 5 half-lives times 4 hours is 20-hour coverage, now it's extended to more like a 27-hour to 30-hour coverage. And most of your IGF-1 has a 30-hour half-life. So even though you're shooting it once a day, after 4 or 5 days of that, your IGF-1 levels have a steady state concentration so long, there's no point in doing multiple injections. Furthermore, there's a direct effect of the GH on top of the IGF-1, on top of other mechanisms that causes sleepiness. So if you were to break it up and do multiple shots throughout the day, you're going to be very tired. In fact, it might induce some narcolepsy. So this is why for almost everyone, the wisest way to do your shots is to do sub-Q before bed. Now, why do people do it before? Why do they do it first thing in the morning? They do it first thing in the morning because they want to get the benefits of the GH for fasted cardio. The problem is if you inject it sub-Q, it takes 3 hours to hit your system. So if you're going to shoot your GH in the morning, then go to fasted cardio, your fasted cardio is done hours before the GH even kicks in. Mm-hmm. So really, if you're using 4 units before bed, you're pretty much going to be at about 2 units 7 hours later, right before you wake up. And the maximum effect of fat loss usually occurs at 1.35 units per 100 kilograms of a person. So for a woman, it's like 0.6 units, which is 2.2 milligrams. For a man, it's like 0.4 milligrams, which is like 1.35 units. So if a guy shoots 8 before bed, he still has more in his system when he does fasted cardio than if he shot it right before he did fasted cardio, unless he did intramuscular. But like you said, most people can't reach the muscle through the fat. So they got to do it sub-Q. So the other benefit would be pre-training and post-training. At this point, only professional or top amateur level bodybuilders are ever going to want to do something this specific. But the refractory period to get the IGF-1 spike at the local level, the actual muscle tissue, for that to respond to the IGF-1, for that to respond to the GH with an IGF-1 spike, you need about a 6-hour refractory period in the absence of insulin, which would mean that you'd wake up, you'd shoot a morning shot, then you'd shoot a shot either pre or post training, then you shoot another shot before bed. And you could do the one before bed sub-Q, so it drags out a little bit longer. In order to benefit from a pre-shot and a post-shot, you'd have to be working out for like 3-4 hours, and you'd have to have an insulin spike somewhere in that. So pre-training GH, lift for 2 or 3 hours, post-lift insulin and GH. But you still have to wait 6 hours now, unless you're going to shoot more insulin before you go to bed. And you'd have to wait 6 hours before. So we're running into an issue where in order to do that type of fancy protocol, you're going to get less sleep, and sleep's still more effective for growth and fat loss than GH is, no matter how much you use. So most people are going to cap out on their systemic IGF-1 between 6 and 8 units a day. So doing 2 units, 2, 3, 4 times a day is usually where most people are going to get their benefits out of it. Using more than 2 units at once, there's no evidence to prove that you can get local IGF-1 conversion with more than 2 units, except for the Frost study in 2005 found that what we really get is local expression of IGF-1 from GH converting to IGF-1 at 7.5 nanomolar concentration of the GH, all the way up into 30 nanomolar. So based on that math, if 2 units can generate 7.5 nanomolar, then 2 units is the minimum amount you can shoot at one time to get a functional amount of IGF-1 conversion at the local level. It would imply that 8 units is the maximum benefit, except at night we get double conversion. So at night we get 13 nanomolar with 2 units, which would imply that at night you could get close to 30 nanomolar with 4 units, which would imply to get the maximum benefit, it'd be 8, 8, and 4. Now, that's based on who they tested. They didn't test anybody. They did it on in vitro. They took Petri dishes with muscle tissue. So how does that factor in with a 200, 300-pound man who's using a gram or 2 grams or 3 grams of testosterone and insulin? We don't know. We don't know how the testosterone and the estrogen that comes from the testosterone facilitates this conversion. We don't know how the insulin, which also facilitates the conversion, functions into this. That maybe less equals more with those, and or maybe the ceiling benefit is even higher. So I've ran a series of experiments on myself over a 3-year period, testing out not just what my E2 relationship is with primo versus masteron at given testosterone levels, but the IGF-1 generated from those E2 levels with a certain amount of GH. And I mapped out my specific response to be that at 4,000 calories and 2 grams total gear, 6 units of GH, and 100 estradiol, I cap out at 458 IGF-1. If I raise my GH, doesn't matter, nothing happens. If I change my E2 up, no benefit. If I bring my E2 down, my IGF-1 goes down. If I change brands between Genotropin, Chinese, generic, the one I tested was Metatropin, or Serostim, no appreciable statistical difference between those. What I did notice was the only thing that could raise my IGF-1 over 458 was when I raised my gear, my insulin, and my calories. I did not expect this to happen, so I didn't do them serially. I didn't do them one at a time. I did them all at once because I was like, I'm not making progress. I'm only got a couple months left of this off season. Let's push it. I'm going to go up on food, go up on insulin, go up on gear. And I did them all at the same time, which I normally wouldn't do because it's not very scientific. Mm-hmm. What I found was I got a 100-point bump to my IGF-1 running this basically the same amount of E2 and the same amount of GH at that point. So even though I capped out at 6, I was like, I'll just use 18, because that's the big thing now, is that 18 units of Serostim before bed is supposed to be the best way to use GH. And I was like, well, we'll see. It doesn't make sense to me, but we'll see. And what I found was, when I switched to that method, I started getting way more abdominal fat. So I started instead to using 2 units twice a day, and then the other 18 at bedtime. And that basically, the 2 fat loss periods I was missing on, I figured 2 units would be enough to get the benefits of the fat loss at those 2 other periods, but I could still use the 18 before bed and get the maximum anabolic potential out of it. Now, do I really need 18 before bed? Maybe there's no benefit over 12 before bed. But the point is that I found that I went up to 568 by increasing the food and the insulin and the gear. So what did it? Was it the food? Was it the insulin? Was it the gear? Was it a combination of the all 3? But what it does tell me is my body's able to get more IGF-1 out of potentially the same GH and the same E2. Perhaps I could have still been at 6 units of GH and gotten that same bump from 458 to 568 by just increasing the gear. Maybe I could have gotten it from just increasing the insulin. Maybe I could have gotten it from just increasing the food. But when you increase the food, you're going to get more insulin conversion. So you never know. And the testosterone is supposed to increase the GH receptor's affinity to GH. And the GH is supposed to increase the androgen receptor to testosterone. So even if you're not going to get the IGF-1 out of it, it still makes sense to use more GH, because GH does more things than just fat loss and muscle building. It also potentiates the benefit of the testosterone and the androgen receptor. So the long and the short of it is, what I came up with is 3 doses a day intramuscular. At least the first 2 should be intramuscular. The last one can be sub-Q. And you want to hit most of it before bed that you can afford. And then if there's enough to go around, so 2, 2, and X, where X is as much as you can afford. And then they found that the absolute limit of benefits for the patients, when they tested this, and I found this study a long time ago, and it was also other leaders in the industry brought it up too in their educational materials. John Jewett and Kurt Haven both have it in their materials, the J3 University, for John and Kurt Haven's book, the GH book he has. And that 30 units a day seems to be the upper limit for 100 kilogram male. Anything beyond 30 units a day has not been shown to be beneficial, but up to 30 units is beneficial. So would I suggest to someone going 2, 2, and 26? No, not necessarily. I don't know. But I know that I said everything that I think is verifiable, that I think is true, is 2, 2, and X based off of what you can afford. And people are concerned about blood work. And again, if everything else is buttoned up, airtight, like if you've got your diet and stress and sleep perfect, and you go into this perfectly healthy, perfect blood pressure, perfect pulse, you're doing cardio regularly, you're able to do 18 METs on a machine, no problem, you're perfectly healthy. I don't think that there's any risk from using 10 units more than 5 units of GH or 15 units more than 10 units. As long as you titrate up slowly, you'll adjust to any potential side effects like the numbness, the tingling in the carpal tunnel. I find a lot of people, as soon as they start getting the numbness and tingling in the carpal tunnel or the narcolepsy, they immediately roll back. They don't just lean into it and be like, okay, well, I won't drive and I won't work for 6 weeks, and I'll see if I adjust to this much GH. Because what I found was 10 years ago, 5 units of GH used to fuck me up. Now I'm able to handle 22 a day just fine. It's just staying. Now, is that a functional amount? Maybe not. Maybe it's a waste. Maybe everything over 8 units is a waste. But I need to prove it. I need to at least prove it in the N equals 1, me, myself. How much can I get away with using, and figure out what my upper limit is? Because what I've found is I'm not usually an outlier. I might be an outlier in that I have the data. I might be an outlier in the discipline. And even though I don't consider myself disciplined, other people might. But I'm not an outlier in how I respond to this medication when I replicate it. If a client does what I do or a patient does what I do, they get almost identical results. I get very rarely do people get completely bizarre results.
And to circle back to all PEDs and then the clients that you work with and even people that you speak to, where are they fucking up the most, or the most common fuck up?
They're aware of the fuck up about sleep. They're aware of the fuck up about nutrition. No one seems to be aware of how bad they're fucking up on their water and salt intake. And no one seems to have any idea that they're clueless when it comes to lifting. I think powerlifters take lifting very seriously. Very seriously. They know I'm going to tuck my elbows in. I'm going to try to bend the bar apart. I'm going to push out while trying to activate my triceps. I'm going to squeeze my glutes as I do. I'm going to keep my shin tucked. They've got 12 points to the perfect bench setup. Not even the execution. The fucking setup's 12 points. Most bodybuilders, they just get in and go. You know, their programming doesn't have any periodization to it. Doesn't have any, they don't account for fatigue. They don't account for deloading. They don't, bodybuilders, they pick a bunch of different exercises and they train mostly instinctively, or they bought a program that's not based off of them. Dr. Mike Israetel did a great job when it comes to programming with coming up with terms like minimum effective volume, max maintenance volume, maximum recoverable volume, and then also the SFR, SFTR, or STR, RSM, like all these terms. Raw stimulus magnitude of the deadlift is great, but you're using your whole body. If you're trying to just change your hamstrings, that's not a good SFR, stimulus to fatigue ratio. So you want less fatigued, more stimulus. We find a good SFR movement. The seated leg curl is a better exercise than a Romanian deadlift for the hamstrings if your glutes are too big, if your back is too big. If you only want to train your hamstrings, then the seated leg curl is better. If you have deficient glutes and deficient back and deficient hamstrings, then you get to hit 3 of your weak points all with one exercise with an RDL. Whether your butt's back and make it glute dominant, or your knees are back and make it hamstring dominant, or whether it's from the floor to get more quads involved in it, whether it's a rack pull and it's mostly lower back and glutes. There's tons of different ways of doing the hip hinge to hit the whole posterior chain. That's stuff that powerlifters have known forever. And so I think that that's a big place that bodybuilders fuck up, is they don't take the training as seriously as the powerlifters do. Likewise, of course, I think the powerlifters should have much better health and be able to survive their PED use better if they took their diet as seriously as bodybuilders.
So when you said hydration and sodium, what key points are you making there?
So the athletes are supposed to be on like 10 grams of sodium a day. And most people think that they're supposed to observe the American Heart Association's bullshit about people having 2,000 milligrams of sodium a day. On what? Studies conducted on people with failed kidneys? Like, that's not applicable to us. It's like, well, you've got failed kidneys, your creatinine is high. Well, no, my creatinine is not indicative of my kidney health. That's the statin C, a test you guys don't order. It's it's like you have no clue what anyone's kidney health is. It's so we can't really work under the model that just because your creatinine's high, you have to eat a salt restriction diet. That doesn't even work with people with high blood pressure. That just makes a bigger mess later on down the road. So having enough sodium to hold the water in your body. If you drink 2 gallons of water, but you're not having any salt, you're just going to pee it all out. People are like, oh, I don't want to drink all that. I'll be peeing all the time. Like, you're peeing all the time because you're not matching your sodium intake with your water intake. Well, how do you know? I was like, just keep adding salt. And if you're adding too much salt, then drinking makes you thirstier. And then it's like, well, I can't cover, like you put so much salt in your food, it's not good anymore. Put the salt in your water. You can put I put 2 grams of salt in this. This is 45 ounces of water. I put 2 grams of salt in here, and that's about 800 milligrams of sodium. and this is 45 ounces of water. So I drink 3 of these, that's a gallon. So I just had 2.4 grams of sodium. So if I drink 6 of these, that's about 2 gallons, and I had 5 grams of sodium right there. Then if each of my 5 meals has a gram of sodium, that's my 10 grams. It's pretty much, it's a crude way of doing it because every body is different. These are just rough guidelines. Yeah. Dr. Andy Galpin has some formulas for pre, during, and post training. I don't know that if you listen to his formulas for volume, it's very vanilla and it may not be applicable to a professional level bodybuilder or to an elite powerlifter. So therefore, one would draw the conclusion that his test sample is just as invalid for estimating the needs of a professional bodybuilder or elite powerlifter. Mm-hmm. And most people aren't honest with themselves about where they fall into that spectrum of how elite are you or how professional are you? It's like if you did 2 bikini shows and you've got an IFBB pro card, are you really a professional bodybuilder? Like, how professional are you? Are you drinking margaritas and eating spinach queso dip, or are you going 5 years without a cheat meal at a time? So the amateur that acts like a professional is a professional to me. The person who has the pro card who isn't very professional about what they put in their body isn't very professional, because people don't think like that. They don't think my profession is eating. They go to work and they take their job seriously, but they don't take their nutrition seriously. If you're a professional athlete, your job is to eat clean. You should consider it a breach of ethics to cheat on your diet, because you have an obligation to your sponsors or your coach or your other people that are supporting you to pull it together. Like, there are people who look up to you. There are even possibly people who look up to me. So if I fuck off and blow it, then not only am I letting them down, but they're less likely to try that much harder to stick to their diet in the future. I remember when I first was coaching, if I ate a cheat meal and I put it on Instagram, every client I had would have cheated on their diet then. Every one of them. It's unbelievable that because I cheated on my diet, they assume they can too. I was like, do you have visible abs? No. Why the fuck do you get a cheat meal? I was like, what, how are you and me the same? And it's like, all you did is create a distance between you and that person. You didn't improve the relationship and create intimacy. You did the opposite. You set a level, said, I'm better than you. The rules don't apply to me. Now they're not going to listen to you at all. Doesn't matter if you're right or not right. Leadership has more of an emotional element to it than it does a logical element to it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, you have to set the best example possible. You have to be professional with every single thing you do, from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed if you're a professional athlete. And that's something a lot of bodybuilders look at it, but I think a lot of powerlifters, they look at it, I'm going to train very strict and be very smart about my training, but I don't think they count all the rest of the day as part of their job as a professional powerlifter. I don't think they take recovery seriously, but I don't think they take that food as seriously. And I think that, like, again, the bodybuilders aren't taking the training. They're emotionally invested in their training, that they're emotionally invested in, I'm going to do this type of squat because this is what I like to do. But that doesn't mean that that's exactly the best squat pattern for them, for their goals at that time in their macro cycle. Like, an example of this, and this isn't to call them out, on Bro Chat, they were discussing Dorian Hamilton's glutes. It wasn't Dorian Hamilton, but it was Dorian's glutes. And his glutes were a huge, absolutely monstrous glutes. And Ian made a guess that he's squatting with his heels flat on the ground. He's not wearing squat shoes and he doesn't have heel elevation. And he chimed in at some point, either I think separately or a previous episode, or even while they were filming it, I don't know. I said, you're right, I don't. I'm not isolating my quads when I squat. I'm not driving my knees over my toes. I don't have heel wedges, or I don't remember his exact words, but he was clearly doing flat-footed barbell back squats like a power lifter. And so he was getting huge glutes. So Why does he do it like that? Probably because he used to be a power lifter and that's how he does it. Or maybe because you can handle more weight, so you feel more masculine because you're stronger. But it's like, if you're a professional bodybuilder, you need to be professional and put your feelings aside and train the exact muscle you're trying to grow with that exercise. So that could be a heel elevated foot forward Smith squat, or a hack squat, or a pendulum squat, or a belt squat. And a lot of people think belt squats are glutes driven. It's like, they can be, but it's also not axially loaded. So it's not compressing your spine. It's traction on your hips. So when you're pushing with your hands and activating your lats, and then the belt itself is pulling on those hips, it's creating a distance through your spine. So it's going to put traction on your spine. It's the healthiest way for you to train your quads or your glutes, depending on if you're doing butt back or knees forward. And I think if people approached these things, like, it was so hard for me to let go of squatting, because it's kind of like the last remnants of powerlifting. The last remnants of being a real man, right? Is I had to give up flat bench. Then I had to give up incline barbell bench and switch to incline Smith bench. I had to give up deadlifting. Then I had to give up rack pulling. Then I had to give up Romanian deadlifting. I had to give up barbell squat. I had to give up Smith squat. So what am I doing? Like, what the fuck is this? I'm doing hammer strength for my chest. I'm doing fucking belt squat and leg press for my quads. I'm doing like straight leg deadlifts with 250 pounds, slow and controlled for reps for my hamstrings. And I'm getting incidental lower. I even gave up barbell row because I was getting too much of everything, not enough lats. It's like pretty much different variations of vertical pulls. It's like, I'm not doing any of the big three in any type of normal capacity. I might as well be in a fucking wheelchair. What is this? And it's like, this is me being a professional and letting go of my youth and accepting that I'm a middle-aged man who's competing against the best in the world in this sport. And I have to do every single thing possible to be the best I can, no matter how humiliating it is. And that's just all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do, but like you said about all in, it's like, you're so into it, you're almost out of it.
Yes.
Like, I have to pull back to put business first to make the money to afford to do this. So it went from, I can afford toilet paper or a light bulb. I can afford Tren or chicken breast. I get, which one is it going to be? I'm going to take the Tren and the chicken breast. I'll hold it until I'm in public, and I'll try to do all my reading during the day with the window open. You know, that's how bad it was. To now it's like, you know, I'm going to use 18 serostim a day. Oh, okay, I'm going to try to use 22 serostim a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's like absurd. It's absurd how much it changes when you focus anything at all towards business that you were putting into. I was putting more effort into just benching one exercise than I probably was into all of business. And then I took some of that energy from one exercise, and like the amount of hours a week I spent rehearsing and thinking about my powerlifting meets while I'm a bodybuilder. That's how emotionally attached I was to those big three lifts. The amount of time I spent thinking about, not even executing them, and thinking about the form or watching training videos about the form. I took that energy and put it in towards making money. And now I can afford 18 units of serostim. That's absurd. And it's like, I'm not all in anymore, but now I'm progressing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Joe Romine said to me after he turned pro, we both won North American together in 2012 with Dallas McCarver. And we did the pose down and everything together. And he said to me afterward, he was like, bodybuilding will take every single thing from your life. You will have nothing left. It will take everything unless you make it priority two. And then it was like, didn't listen. Like you said, I wouldn't have listened, didn't listen. And now I know I'm going to be that Joe Romine. I'm going to say to somebody, bodybuilding will take everything from your life if you let it. You will have nothing left. You have to put something else first. Like, for instance, business. Or if you have a wonderful woman, put her first. Something. You have to have something that's more important to you than bodybuilding. Otherwise, you will burn the fuck out and you'll have nothing left.
Were there any topics you want to talk about I didn't bring up?
Fuck, we covered everything. We covered everything. I feel like a dick because you didn't do any talking. I did all the talking this whole thing. Oh, man. So what do you think about my assessment about those big 3 lifts? If you were me, how would you have handled things regarding the squat pattern, hip hinge pattern, and bench pattern?
Exactly how you're doing it now.
Okay.
Right? Because it's that is your profession. That's what your objective is. You know, if it's to build the quads, right?
Right.
There's if it's a powerlifting squat, right, and it's done to depth, you know, the systemic, like you talked about with Mike, the systemic fatigue that's accumulated from that has a cost, right? But at a certain point in time, the return you're going to get from that will probably be higher. You know, when you're younger, we can recover from it better.
Right.
But as the weights go up and you get stronger at it, that recovery becomes harder. Because that, as you get older, that recovery becomes harder. And as you use the example with Dorian, is it really developing what you need to develop?
Right.
Right. Now, there's other things that you could have done. You know, you could have just moved it as a third movement, pre-fatigued everything else.
Yeah, I was actually, I was doing 10 sets of leg extensions, 10 sets of leg press.
But when you think
9
that,
sets of hack squat, then I would squat.
I mean, when you really think that through, though, is that really optimal? Right. Just pre-fatigue all the shit you don't want to work and hope it doesn't fire, and it still will.
Right.
But hope it doesn't fire. It's stupid if you really think it through.
What's funny is people would do the principle behind pre-fatigue is you handle less weight. I always handled more. I could squat deeper and slower with the same weight if I spent a couple hours working my legs before I got to squatting, because it loosened them up enough to actually do it, because they're always so tight.
Yeah.
And it's like, you do like 10 sets of leg extensions, 1 set to failure, 9 sets of leg press, 1 set to failure, 4 or 5 set or 8 sets of leg, basically 1 plate, 2 plate, 3 plate, all the way up to 9 plate on the hack squat. Then you go over to start doing your squatting, and you're going, you know, half a plate, whole plate, half a plate, whole plate, half a plate, whole plate, up to 5 plates. And it's like, fuck, this is not working. The machine's full. It's like, what am I going to do? It's like, I can do more reps, but my lungs can't handle that. You know, like 500-pound, 2 depth squats. Like, how many, you can do more than 8 or 9 reps like that? You'd have to go faster. And then you're going to increase the risk of injury. It's like, I've been here for 3 hours before I even get to the squat. How the fuck can I pre-fatigue myself anymore before I get to this? I'm still this strong. It's like, so that's, you know, you go from 400 pounds to 500 pounds, your waist is going to have to do that. Yeah. So your physique's shot to shit. You look like garbage now. Yeah. And it's hard to pull that back off too. Right. Yeah. So I have to give up all spinally loaded shit for pretty much the rest of my life. So I should try to get my waist back down to the 26 inches it was when I was squatting 4 plates. And the lats and shoulders wider. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, so it's an issue John ran into. Right. It's like, John, you know, you can't, it's really hard with the structure. Once your waist is big, especially if it tears up the middle. Luckily, mine hasn't torn up the middle yet. Once your stomach tears up the middle, what the fuck are you going to do? There's almost no way to vacuum that. Well, he pulled those things out. Yeah. You know, and just made everything else wider, you know, but it took a long time, you know, for it to come in. And there was also the loss of the abdominal control. Right. You know, that he had to contend with that as well. But I saw basically what you're talking about there, you know, with that. He loved to squat, you know, but then it's, where's this going to go? Then it went from, let's be a third movement. Then let's basically just axe it because of the torso, really. Yeah. It's like, no matter what, it's like, instead of getting 11 reps with 400 pounds, I'm getting 6 reps with 400 pounds. I'm still loading my back with 400 pounds, and I'm still getting 5 effective reps. I didn't lose shit. Like, no consequence to this. It's like I'm just training my waist and my glutes as much as I'm training my quads. Even though I pre-exhausted my quads and my hamstrings, my adductors and my calves and my glutes before I even got to I took out every fucking muscle I could. It doesn't matter. When it comes to squatting, it just works.
What did you see when you took the bench out?
So I saw when I finally retired the bench press, even though I was doing incline Smith press, I retired that. Even I tried going slow, deep pause in the bottom, all that stuff. I'd never had pain-free shoulders for 30 years. I had significant shoulder pain by the time I was 16. And I had shoulder pain from 16 until I was 43. And it got in the way of all my delt training and all my tricep. Everything I did, I got the shoulder pain got in the way of. As soon as I took bench press out, and I'm on a machine now, so I'm like, I don't give a fuck. So I'm just going to do sets of 10 to 12. There's no, you can't, what are you going to be like? Oh, I'm really good at the incline hammer strength. You know, this is the stupidest thing ever. So once I started pause, squeeze, and I'm using a machine that only goes up to 150. So I have to make the best of it, right? And once I started doing that, shoulder pain went away, shoulders started growing. Became a dominant body part. Triceps started growing. And it's like, okay, my chest started growing. It's like, so the incline bench and probably before that, the flat bench had been holding me back for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
Like that's all I've been doing. It had just been holding me back. And it's like, I took the barbell bent row away. I was up to like 435 with that thing. Right. And it's like not a huge back. And my right side was big and my left side was bad and my spine was crooked. And I had lower back and hip pain all the time. All the time.
Well, the way I've always explained it is, you know, as a bodybuilder, you're training in the muscle.
Right.
You know, as a power lifter, you're training in a movement.
Right.
Those are vastly different things.
So I took out the bent row. My back looks balanced and my spine straight and my hip almost never hurts. And if it does, it's either my foot's tight or I didn't roll out my IT band. Yeah. Or I need to stretch my psoas or I need to stretch my glute or my QL. But it's an easy fix. It's not like I'm in constant pain all the time. So it's like the exercises that made me strong and made me think I was good at something.
Well, they got you where you're at.
Right.
Right. It's all a step process.
Right. And it's like kind of like now that I'm not strong anymore, you know, I feel like that's a huge part of your self-esteem that's just gone.
Well, you know, I can counter and say building that strength allows you to use more weight on the movements that you are doing now.
Right.
Right. Because if you go back to when you're younger and you did none of those movements, you know, the case could be made you wouldn't be able to use enough weight on all the other stuff to grow.
Right.
To the point that you want to grow to.
Right. And so you're able to generate more stimulus on the tissue, but you also get more fatigue.
And I'm talking all compound movements here, not just the squat, the
right.
bench and deadlifts.
But still, I mean, squat, bench, deadlifts, and pull-ups, that's almost your whole body. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why people have been doing them for 100 and something years. You know?
But when we're talking bodybuilding competitively, there's also a reason why you don't see a whole lot of those.
Never.
At the top level.
That Ian was the last one, I think, to ever incline bench. And he even said recently, he's like, I used to bench, you know, 5, almost 6 plates on incline bench. And this was as recently as like 2021. Right. And then he retired it when he started working with P-Tour. And he's like, finally, my chest is growing. And it's like, he said, I used to do bent rows and I retired it. Finally, my lats are getting bigger. I was like, fuck. I did that too around the same time. And it's just so, I mean, even when I try to keep them in and I was bent rowing 350 with a pause at the top, like hold, come down slow, but I did them to dead stops. So dead stop, hold, bring it down, hold. And they were like, oh, your range of motion's so short, it's useless. I'm like, this only trains the contracted position anyway. Mm-hmm. There's no tension at the bottom. Except for on your lower back. It's like, might as well put some dead stops there and just do going from your knees to your hips, sliding up your thighs, basically, with the bar. And it was like, I got up to like 350 doing those dead stop for 10. And I was like, I was getting strong again, but it's not the same thing as just doing the stupid rinky-dink thing I did on the video for the channel with the cable across the body. It's like you get so much better lower lat involvement that way. Because if you're just trying to work the upper lats, you could just use a T-bar row or any machine row. But the real trick is getting that lower lat involvement. That is a hard thing to reach. It's hard to get just that lower portion of the lat to fire without the whole back lighting up. And it's frustrating because I don't have low lats. I've got high lat attachments. So the lats are going to look weird no matter what I do. And you can't fix it, but I'm stubborn, so I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to polish this turd if it's the last thing I do.
Any other, well, actually, wait, I got questions here.
Good.
I think we covered them though. Well, we already got into that. How often should somebody get their blood work done? I know it's a general question, but
so it depends. So why are they getting their blood work done? They're getting their blood work done so they know they're healthy. Well, what happens if your doctor says you're not healthy? Are you going to quit? And they're going to say no. And it's like, then why are you even get it done? It's like, I like to look at it more like it's information gathering so we can adjust the cycle. I have a completely different approach. It's like, what do we need to change? Like, have we figured out the perfect amount of tests to get E2 and the perfect amount of primo to control that E2 and the perfect amount of GH to get the maximum IGF-1 possible in you? If so, we don't really need to test those anymore. So what are we testing? It's like, well, I want to know I'm healthy. I'm like, did you have any abnormal markers before? If the answer is no, then it's like, are we running more gear than before? If the answer is no, then there's really no reason to test it. So I have a different approach towards that, which is, what am I trying to find? What is the answer to the question? So for instance, I just increased my load from 2,400 to 3,300. That's a huge jump. So I should get blood work done about a week or a month from now, make sure I'm okay. And what am I going to check? I'm going to check my GGT, make sure my liver is okay. It will be. I'm going to check my cystatin C, make sure my kidneys are okay. It will be. I'm going to check my CBC because I want to see my hematocrit and hemoglobin. If I go in dehydrated, it's going to look like shit. If I go in hyperhydrated, it's going to look great. And I'm confident that everything's going to be fine because the diet's good and the training's good. And I don't really expect to see anything. My blood pressure hasn't went up and my fasting blood glucose hasn't went up. So I'm not showing any type of degeneration. So why would I expect the organs to be suffering? Because if they were, I would expect to see the blood pressure going up. And not necessarily, people are like, that's not always true. It's not always true. You know what I mean? But some cats bark and some dogs might meow. But for the most part, I don't expect that. So I'm not going to go around and biopsy every cat to see if there's any bark in it.
Yeah.
So it's like, we don't play the game for the outliers. It's like, we don't need to put tampons in boys' restrooms. There's not enough of a population of boys who get periods to necessitate every Canadian restroom having a tampon in it. And it's the same thing here. It's like, if there should be a reason you're getting it done. So the non-flippant answer is, typically it's every 3 months. If you want to be paranoid and make sure you're not dying, then get it done every 3 months. If you're a little bit more confident and nothing's changing, you're just like, yeah, I've been on the same off season for 3 years and I haven't changed my gear load. I haven't changed my diet. Every 6 months to a year is plenty, right? It's like, I mean, you want to check your fasting glucose at least once or twice a week. You want to test your blood pressure every week or two, because it's fine until it's not. And if you waited 6 months and checked your blood pressure and it's 30 points higher, like, when did it go wrong? It's like, well, we made 6 changes since then. So I don't know which of the 6 changes in the last 6 months fucked the blood pressure up, or a combination of them. You're not gathering data fast enough. Now, if you're changing your gear, if you're like, okay, we just completed a show, let's see how bad it is, so we know how far overboard we got. And then in a couple months, like, let's get it tested again or a month or 2 months, get it tested again, make sure we're perfectly clean and we're good to go. And then we can start a real off season. And then 3 months into that off season, 6 months in the season, once you hit peak concentration, as long as you stay there every 6 months. And then when it's time to transition into a cut phase, it's like, let's check the blood work. If you're perfectly good, we can go right into the cut. If you're not, if your organs are cooked, we got to cool off, wash everything out, wait till everything's clean, and then jump on again. So it's a structural thing, you know. And the other thing is I just don't fuck around with dangerous shit. I know that the HDL is going to go through the floor if I use Anabar. I know my GGT is going to go to shit if I run a bunch of orals. I know that my prolactin is going to be a mess if I run a bunch of Tren. I don't need to run it then. I'm just going to use the compounds I can get away with. And I can use a lot more of those because I can get away with them. So once you know what you're doing and you know how your body responds to these drugs, then it's not a random thing. Blood work isn't one thing. It's just like saying women.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, is it Lizzo or is it Megan Fox? It's like, well, it doesn't matter. They're all women. And it's like, that's the same thing to say about blood work is the blood work I order is completely different than blood work that Mr. Magoo over here orders, or it's completely different from the CBC and the CMP that the VA is willing to pay for.
Mm-hmm. So there's one quote that you said in one of the things I was listening to you on where I got to ask you about this because I laughed my ass off. Tren is like bodybuilding and ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca. Yeah, it was Paul's favorite quote of mine. It's like, he's like, I think the Tren is making me get a divorce. I was like, no, Tren is making you see the truth. It's it's anabolic ayahuasca. So I think that it's like, I think it's important to take into consideration that different perspectives are valid and you're not always the same person. So if you put your brain in an altered conscious state, your perspective is going to be different. When people are blowing up at their wife or their girlfriend because they're pissed on Tren, at that time, what they're saying makes sense to them and is justified. They're perceiving whatever she did or didn't do differently than if they were calm and not on Tren. So wouldn't that also mean that you perceive other things differently when you're on Tren? So it may not just be brain damage causing an altered emotional response. It could also be that you're just transcendentally involved in a dimension of pure and utter suffering. That you've got 1 foot into the dimensional pain of hell, that you're like so miserable, your perspective's so different that it makes Les Mis look like a comedy. And so your perspective changes. It's like everything's all good and you love her to pieces. And then you look at your life and you're like, this is total shit. And then you take inventory and you're like, why is my life fucking horrible? And you're like, well, I'm stupid and I'm lazy and I'm not doing what I want to. And then you're like, and this person did this. And it's like, well, I can't fix that stuff, but I can get rid of that person. You know, it's like one of those things. And I don't mean to make light of his particular situation, nor is it my business to talk about it, but I was not on Tren and I basically had a pretty clear picture of what was going on. And he started seeing it, in my opinion, very clearly for what it was. And that's kind of like where the perspective came from. And honestly, I don't remember half the quotes I have. I just say this shit. I don't think about it first. What did I say earlier? It was like, what do you call it? Not being on test and being on DECA only changes the economy of genitals. I know that Joe and Jake are going to cut that and put it on the best of Todd 2024. The economy of genitals is definitely going to be a t-shirt.
Any final thoughts that you have?
Just I had a great time. I'm so happy to be here. I feel like I'm in the Jedi Council chamber in Coruscant. Like this is the Mecca of powerlifting the world over. Like this is the Columbus, Ohio, and this is the command center of Columbus, Ohio. It's like ground zero of this entire sport. And it's such an honor to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming out.
My pleasure.
This has been great. How can people get a hold of you?
All right. So you can Google Todd Lee MD. It'll probably take you where you need to go. But if not, at Todd Lee MD for Instagram and Dr. Todd Lee's Anabolic University for YouTube. That'll probably be the easiest way to go because you can find my tap link, and my tap link will take you to all of my sources and all the ways to get a hold of me, whether it's a affiliate program I'm part of or whatnot. Those are the places to get a hold of me. I respond to all my messages on Instagram. Some people will be like, no, you didn't. It's like, it's Christmas week and New Year's. I'm a little behind, but I will get back to some people. But for the most part, I'm on top of it every day with the Instagram responses. We'll have a link in the description for all that. Yeah, I've got a tap link I can send. Okay, cool. Thank you for coming out. My pleasure. We're done. All right, cool. You guys are selecting Marek for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. There's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are, thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Marek Health for all your hormone optimization and performance needs. All right, guys, we've got a new limited edition drop, the original Mountain Dog tee that John Meadows had us design from the very beginning. So it's the first tee that he had made. Once again, this is a limited edition item. So when they're gone, they're gone. While I have your attention, you've seen me wear this one in a few podcasts to date. We've been holding back on it. This here, the 4-star tee, I think that's what we call it. It's on the website, new items, also under limited edition. Check out our shoulder saver pads. It's an easy way to do limited restricted range of motion exercises like board press that basically you just pop the pad on the bar, reduces the range of motion, pop it back off when you're done. Thank you guys for the support. Head over to elitefts.com. All right, guys, if you like the Table Talk podcast, then you're going to love the crew. If you're struggling with trying to get through a sticking point, you're trying to figure some specific aspect of your training out that you just can't dial in, you're dealing with injuries, you're trying to figure out how to better optimize your training, all the stuff you're seeing on social media is confusing, and all you need is a little guidance and support, or just somebody to look at your lifts to make sure that they're either heading in the right direction, or if there's a weak point in the lift, they can point out what that weak point is. Well, that's what we have the crew for. So when you join the crew, you get an extra Table Talk podcast each month called the Crewcast. You also get access to our Discord community, which has a training Q&A, form checks with top coaches, mindset section, nutrition, training logs, programs, over 30 ebooks, plus exclusive ebooks just for the crew, webinars, lectures, seminars, giveaways ranging from full strength equipment. We've given away many yoke bars this year. We've given away actually pieces of strength equipment as well as accessory items, and you get exclusive crew discounts. So go to the link in the description that says join the crew, click it, join now, and start getting stronger today. Elite FTS was founded in 1998 with the aim to live, learn, and pass on. We've done this through training-related content that allows you to become the strongest athlete and coach that you can. Over the past 2 decades, actually 2.5 decades, we've published more complimentary training media than anybody else in the industry. When you look at the number of articles, the Q&As, the blogs, the videos, the podcasts, there's over 1 million pages of content that we've put out there. We've been able to do this through your support of Elite FTS. So when you purchase Elite FTS strength equipment, bands, accessories, gear, apparel, or anything through the site, you directly help support the content that we put out, which in turn helps support other people on their
journey of becoming stronger and better coaches. So stronger athletes and better coaches, which encompasses the aim and the vision to live, learn, and pass on. So I thank you for the support that you've been giving for the past 25 years and encourage you to keep supporting Elite FTS into the future so we can all help more people become better and stronger. Discount code TABLE TALK for 10% off your first order.